Long before the colossal sauropods dominated the landscape with their towering necks and thunderous footsteps, there existed a remarkable group of dinosaurs that would set the stage for the giants to come. These were the Prosauropods, and their story is one of evolutionary innovation, dietary revolution, and the gradual transformation from modest bipedal creatures into the ancestors of the largest land animals that ever lived. Picture this. You're standing in a late Triassic forest, roughly 210 million years ago. The air is thick with humidity, and around you stretch landscapes that would be completely alien to our modern eyes. No grass covers the ground, no flowers bloom in the understory, and the dominant plants are ferns, conifers, and cycads. In this ancient world, a creature emerges from the vegetation that would forever change the course of dinosaur evolution. It's roughly the size of a large dog, walks primarily on its hind legs, and possesses a curious mix of features that hint at something extraordinary to come. This is where our journey begins, with these pioneering dinosaurs that would bridge the gap between their smaller carnivorous ancestors and the massive herbivorous giants that would later rule the Mesozoic world. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. These early prosauropods weren't just evolutionary stepping stones. They were remarkable creatures in their own right, solving problems and adapting to challenges that no dinosaur had faced before. The term prosauropod literally means before the sauropods. But don't let that simple definition fool you into thinking these were just primitive versions of their famous descendants. These dinosaurs were evolutionary pioneers, the first large dinosaurs to experiment with plant-eating lifestyles. And they did so with an ingenuity that would make any modern engineer jealous. What makes prosauropods so compelling is that they represent one of the most dramatic dietary shifts in the history of life on Earth. Think about it. Virtually all theropod dinosaurs, their closest relatives, were carnivores. They had sharp, serrated teeth designed for slicing meat, powerful claws for grasping prey, and lightweight builds optimized for speed and agility. But somewhere in the late Triassic, some of these theropods began experimenting with something completely different. They started incorporating plant material into their diets, and eventually many became primarily or exclusively herbivorous. This wasn't just a simple menu change. Switching from meat to plants required fundamental restructuring of virtually every body system. Their teeth needed to change from knife-like blades to leaf-shaped grinding surfaces. Their digestive systems had to evolve to break down tough plant fibers instead of easily digestible meat. Their body proportions had to shift to accommodate the massive gut space needed to process vegetation. Even their posture and locomotion had to adapt as they became heavier and more cumbersome. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This transformation didn't happen overnight. The prosauropods show us evolution in action, displaying a spectacular range of intermediate forms that demonstrate exactly how this incredible transition unfolded over millions of years. Some early prosauropods retained sharp teeth and likely remained omnivorous, eating both plants and small animals. Others developed increasingly specialized features for plant processing. eventually becoming the first truly large herbivorous dinosaurs. The diversity among prosauropods is absolutely staggering. We're talking about creatures that range from modest 1-meter-long bipeds that weighed no more than a medium-sized dog, all the way up to massive 10-meter-long quadrupeds that tipped the scales at several tons. Some retained the swift, agile builds of their theropod ancestors, while others evolved into slow-moving, pot-bellied giants with columnar limbs designed to support enormous weight. What's even more remarkable is where these dinosaurs lived and thrived. Prosauropod fossils have been discovered on every continent, including Antarctica, revealing that these creatures successfully colonized virtually every available terrestrial habitat during the late Triassic and early Jurassic periods. They adapted to environments ranging from arid deserts to lush forests, from coastal plains to mountainous highlands. This global distribution tells us something profound about their evolutionary success. They weren't just lucky survivors. They were adaptable innovators. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how revolutionary these dinosaurs were. Before prosauropods, the largest land animals were roughly the size of modern crocodiles. The idea of a terrestrial vertebrate weighing multiple tons and stretching longer than a school bus was completely unprecedented. These dinosaurs didn't just grow large. They invented new ways of being large, developing body plans and physiological systems that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. The skeletal adaptations alone are mind-boggling. Early prosauropods had to solve the engineering challenge of supporting increasingly massive bodies while still maintaining mobility. They developed robust limb bones with thick walls and complex internal structures to resist the enormous stresses of carrying tons of weight. Their vertebrae became increasingly pneumatized, filled with air spaces that reduced weight while maintaining strength, a feature that would later reach its pinnacle in their sauropod descendants. But perhaps most fascinating of all is how prosauropods revolutionized the very concept of dinosaur ecology. Before their emergence, dinosaur communities were relatively simple affairs dominated by various carnivorous theropods and smaller omnivores. The evolution of large herbivorous prosauropods completely transformed these ecosystems, creating new ecological niches and establishing the foundation for the complex food webs that would characterize the rest of the Mesozoic Era. These herbivorous giants became the primary consumers that could convert vast quantities of plant material into animal biomass, supporting larger and more diverse communities of carnivorous dinosaurs. They were ecosystem engineers, creatures whose very existence fundamentally altered the environments they inhabited. Their feeding activities would have shaped plant communities, their movements would have created trails and clearings, and their massive bodies would have provided resources for scavengers and decomposers. The behavioral implications are equally fascinating. Many prosauropods appear to have lived in social groups, and some species show evidence of sophisticated parental care that extended well beyond hatching. We're talking about dinosaurs that may have exhibited complex social behaviors, communication systems, and even rudimentary forms of culture. The discovery of prosauropod nesting sites with multiple eggs and evidence of adult supervision suggests that these weren't just mindless plant processing machines, but intelligent animals with rich behavioral repertoires. As we delve deeper into the world of prosauropods, we'll explore how these remarkable creatures developed their plant-eating adaptations, examine the incredible diversity of forms they evolved, and trace their evolutionary journey from small bipedal omnivores to massive quadrupedal herbivores. We'll discover how they solved the challenges of digesting tough plant material, how they adapted their locomotion to support enormous body weights, and how they established the ecological foundations that would support the even more spectacular sauropods that followed. The story of Prosauropods is ultimately a story about innovation, adaptation, and evolutionary success on a scale that's almost difficult to comprehend. These weren't just the ancestors of the famous long-necked giants. They were pioneers, explorers of new evolutionary possibilities that opened up entirely new ways of living on our planet. Their legacy extends far beyond their famous descendants, influencing the entire trajectory of terrestrial vertebrate evolution and establishing patterns that would persist for over 150 million years. So join me as we step back in time to meet these extraordinary creatures, explore their remarkable diversity, and uncover the secrets of how they transformed from modest beginnings into some of the most successful dinosaurs ever to walk the earth. The story of the Prosauropods is a tale of evolutionary triumph that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the age of dinosaurs. But before we can truly understand how these evolutionary pioneers transformed the world, we need to examine the specific innovations that made their success possible. The transition from carnivory to herbivory wasn't just about changing what they ate. It required fundamental reimagining of virtually every aspect of their biology. Let's start with perhaps the most obvious adaptation, their teeth. Early prosauropods faced a challenge that no dinosaur had encountered before. Plant material is incredibly tough compared to meat. Leaves contain cellulose, lignin, and other structural compounds that are essentially inedible to most carnivores. Meat, on the other hand, is soft, protein-rich, and relatively easy to digest. The sharp, serrated teeth that worked perfectly for slicing flesh were completely inadequate for processing vegetation. The solution that prosauropods evolved is absolutely brilliant. Instead of the knife-like teeth of their theropod relatives, they developed leaf-shaped teeth with flattened surfaces and complex edge patterns. These weren't just randomly modified carnivore teeth. They were precision-engineered plant processing tools. The edges of these teeth featured tiny serrations that worked like microscopic saw blades, shredding tough plant fibers into manageable pieces. But here's what's really fascinating. Different prosauropod species evolved different dental solutions for different types of vegetation. Some developed broad, spatulate teeth perfect for cropping soft ferns and young shoots. Others evolved narrower, more pointed teeth, better suited for stripping leaves from conifer branches. A few species even retained some sharp teeth alongside their plant processing equipment, suggesting they maintained omnivorous diets throughout their evolutionary history. The dental revolution was just the beginning. Processing plant material requires far more than just cutting it up. It needs to be thoroughly broken down before the nutrients can be extracted. This is where prosauropods developed one of their most ingenious adaptations: gastroliths, or stomach stones. These weren't just random rocks that the dinosaurs accidentally swallowed. Prosauropods deliberately selected and ingested specific types of stones, usually smooth, hard varieties that would serve as biological millstones in their digestive systems. These gastroliths would tumble around in specialized chambers of their stomachs, grinding up plant material into a pulpy mass that could be more easily processed by digestive enzymes. The sophistication of this system is remarkable. Different prosauropod species selected different types of stones based on their dietary preferences. Some preferred quartzite pebbles for their exceptional hardness and durability. Others chose volcanic stones that provided optimal grinding surfaces. The dinosaurs had to learn which stones worked best, where to find them, and how to maintain their gastrolith collections as the stones wore down over time. But even the most efficient teeth and stomach stones couldn't solve the fundamental problem of plant digestion: extracting nutrients from cellulose. Unlike meat, which can be broken down relatively quickly by stomach acid and enzymes, plant cell walls require specialized bacteria to break them down. This is where prosauropods made perhaps their most important evolutionary breakthrough. They developed massively enlarged digestive systems that functioned essentially like biological fermentation vats. These extended gut chambers provided space and time for symbiotic bacteria to work their magic, slowly breaking down cellulose into simple sugars that could be absorbed and used for energy. The process required hours or even days to complete, which is why plant-eating animals typically need such large digestive systems compared to carnivores. The implications of this digestive revolution were profound. Carrying around a massive fermentation chamber fundamentally altered the body proportions of prosauropods. They developed the characteristic pot-bellied appearance that would become even more pronounced in their sauropod descendants. Their centers of gravity shifted forward and downward, making bipedal locomotion increasingly difficult as they grew larger. This brings us to one of the most dramatic transformations in prosauropod evolution: the gradual shift from bipedal to quadrupedal locomotion. Early prosauropods were nimble bipeds, capable of swift movement on their powerful hind limbs, but as they grew larger and developed more extensive digestive systems, maintaining balance on two legs became increasingly challenging. The transition wasn't instantaneous. Many prosauropod species were facultative bipeds, meaning they could walk on either 2 or 4 legs depending on the situation. When feeding, they might drop down to all fours for stability and to bring their heads closer to low-growing vegetation. When threatened or moving quickly, they could rear up onto their hind legs for speed and agility. But the largest prosauropods eventually became obligate quadrupeds, with forelimbs that were modified to serve as weight-bearing pillars rather than grasping appendages. This transformation required extensive remodeling of their shoulder girdles, arm bones, and even their spinal columns. The engineering challenges were immense. How do you redesign a bipedal skeleton to support tons of weight on 4 legs while still maintaining mobility. The solutions that prosauropods evolved were remarkably sophisticated. They developed columnar limb bones with thick walls and complex internal architectures that could resist enormous compressive forces. Their shoulder blades became massive anchor-like structures that distributed the weight of their enormous torsos across broad areas of their rib cages. Their vertebrae developed elaborate systems of air spaces and internal struts that maximized strength while minimizing weight. Perhaps most impressively, they evolved flexible necks that could extend their reach without requiring them to move their massive bodies. This was a crucial adaptation that allowed them to access vegetation across wide areas while minimizing the energy costs of locomotion. A prosauropod could stand in one spot and sweep its neck in a broad arc, harvesting plants from a circle dozens of meters in diameter. The neck modifications weren't just about length. They were about precision engineering. Each vertebra had to be carefully shaped to allow the neck to bend and twist while still supporting the weight of the head and resisting the enormous forces generated by the jaw muscles during feeding. The neck muscles themselves had to be redesigned to provide both power and fine motor control across an extended range of motion. But all of these remarkable adaptations raise a fundamental question. Why did prosauropods evolve these complex plant-eating specializations in the first place? What drove them to abandon the relatively simple carnivorous lifestyle that had served theropods so well? The answer lies in understanding the late Triassic world and the ecological opportunities that were available to innovative dinosaurs. This was a time of dramatic environmental change, with new plant communities spreading across the landscape and creating vast untapped resources for any animal capable of exploiting them. Conifer forests were expanding, fern prairies stretched across lowland areas, and cycad groves dotted the landscape like ancient palm forests. For millions of years, these plant communities had been largely unexploited by large vertebrates. Most herbivorous animals of the time were relatively small, specialized creatures that couldn't take advantage of the enormous biomass locked up in tree canopies and tall vegetation. This represented a massive ecological opportunity for any animal capable of growing large enough and developing the right feeding adaptations to exploit these resources. Prosauropods were the first dinosaurs to recognize and capitalize on this opportunity. By growing large and developing sophisticated plant processing capabilities, they gained access to virtually unlimited food resources that were inaccessible to their smaller competitors. This ecological breakthrough allowed them to achieve population sizes and geographic distributions that were unprecedented among large terrestrial vertebrates. The success of this strategy is written in stone across the fossil record. Prosauropod remains have been discovered in rock formations spanning 3 continents and representing millions of years of evolutionary time. Some fossil sites contain hundreds of prosauropod skeletons, suggesting that these dinosaurs achieved population densities rivaling those of modern large herbivores like wildebeest or bison. But perhaps most remarkably, prosauropods didn't just succeed as individuals. They fundamentally transformed entire ecosystems. Their evolution created new ecological niches and established the foundation for the complex food webs that would characterize dinosaur communities for the next 150 million years. They became the primary consumers that converted plant biomass into animal protein, supporting diverse communities of carnivorous dinosaurs that would never have been possible in their absence. The ripple effects of prosauropod evolution extended far beyond the dinosaur community itself. Their feeding activities shaped plant evolution, favoring species that could tolerate heavy browsing pressure or grow beyond the reach of even the longest necks. Their movements created networks of trails and clearings that influenced everything from soil formation to water flow patterns. Their massive bodies, both in life and death, became resources and habitat for countless smaller organisms. As we examine the incredible diversity of prosauropods, we discover that these pioneering dinosaurs experimented with virtually every conceivable approach to large-scale herbivory. Each species was like a different prototype in evolution's grand experiment, testing new solutions to the fundamental challenges of plant-eating life. Take the early forms that emerged during the late Triassic period. These creatures were still remarkably close to their theropod origins, retaining the swift, agile builds that had served their carnivorous ancestors so well. They measured only 1 meter or 2 in length and weighed no more than a large dog. Yet they were already pushing the boundaries of what dinosaur bodies could accomplish. These early pioneers faced a fascinating evolutionary dilemma. They needed to process increasing amounts of plant material to fuel their growing bodies, but they also needed to maintain the speed and agility that kept them safe from predators. The solution they developed was absolutely ingenious. They became dietary generalists, supplementing their plant-based meals with insects, small vertebrates, and whatever other protein sources they could find. This omnivorous strategy allowed them to get the best of both worlds. They could take advantage of abundant plant resources when they were available, but they weren't completely dependent on vegetation for survival. Their teeth reflected this dietary flexibility, featuring a remarkable combination of leaf-shaped grinding surfaces and pointed, sharp-edged cutting tools that could handle both tough plant fibers and animal protein. But evolution rarely stands still, and some prosauropod lineages began pushing the boundaries of size and specialization in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few million years earlier. By the early Jurassic, we see forms that had grown to truly impressive dimensions, reaching lengths of 8 meters or more and weighing several tons. These giants faced engineering challenges that no terrestrial vertebrate had ever encountered before. How do you support a multi-ton body while still maintaining enough mobility to find food and escape from predators? How do you process enormous quantities of low-quality plant material efficiently enough to fuel such massive metabolisms? How do you coordinate the movements of limbs that are longer than most entire dinosaurs? The solutions that emerged were nothing short of revolutionary. These larger prosauropods developed skeletal architectures that were masterpieces of biological engineering. Their limb bones became hollow, filled with complex networks of air spaces that reduced weight without sacrificing strength. This pneumatic bone structure was so effective that it would later be refined and perfected by their sauropod descendants. eventually allowing them to reach truly colossal sizes. Their vertebral columns became elaborate systems of struts, buttresses, and air chambers that distributed weight efficiently while maintaining flexibility. Each vertebra was precisely shaped to interlock with its neighbors, creating a structural system that was simultaneously strong enough to support tons of weight and flexible enough to allow for the complex movements required during feeding and locomotion. But perhaps most remarkably, these giants developed feeding strategies that were completely unprecedented in the animal kingdom. They became high browsers, using their extending necks to access vegetation that was completely out of reach for any other terrestrial herbivore. This gave them exclusive access to enormous food resources, effectively eliminating competition from other plant-eating animals. The biomechanics of high browsing required extraordinary modifications to their neck musculature and skeletal structure. The muscles that controlled neck movement had to be powerful enough to support and maneuver heads that weighed hundreds of pounds, yet precise enough to allow for delicate feeding movements among fragile vegetation. The cervical vertebrae had to be shaped to allow for extreme extension and flexion while still providing anchor points for the massive muscle systems required for neck control. Some species developed necks that were longer than their entire bodies, creating feeding envelopes that extended dozens of meters in every direction from where they stood. This allowed them to harvest vegetation across enormous areas without expending the energy required to move their massive bodies, a crucial adaptation for animals whose metabolic requirements were measured in hundreds of pounds of vegetation per day. The diversity of feeding specializations among prosauropods is absolutely staggering. Some species developed broad, flattened skulls with expansive tooth rows that were perfect for processing large quantities of soft vegetation like ferns and young conifer shoots. Others evolved narrow, pointed skulls that could be inserted deep into dense vegetation to selectively harvest the most nutritious plant parts. A few remarkable species even developed downturned lower jaws that functioned like biological sickles, allowing them to crop vegetation with unprecedented efficiency. These beak-like structures were often reinforced with horny sheaths that provided additional cutting power and protected the underlying bone from the constant wear of processing tough plant material. The digestive adaptations became increasingly sophisticated as prosauropods grew larger and more specialized. The simple enlarged stomachs of early forms evolved into complex multi-chambered systems that rivaled those of modern ruminants in their efficiency. Different chambers served different functions. Some were optimized for initial breakdown of plant material. Others provided ideal conditions for bacterial fermentation, and still others specialized in extracting and absorbing nutrients from the processed plant matter. The bacterial communities that inhabited these digestive systems were themselves marvels of evolutionary cooperation. Different species of microorganisms specialized in breaking down different types of plant compounds, working together in carefully balanced ecosystems that existed entirely within the guts of their dinosaur hosts. These symbiotic relationships were so intimate that the dinosaurs and their microbial partners essentially functioned as single integrated organisms. Managing these internal ecosystems required sophisticated behavioral adaptations. Prosauropods had to carefully regulate their feeding patterns to maintain optimal conditions for their symbiotic bacteria. Eating too much too quickly could disrupt the delicate chemical balances required for efficient fermentation. Consuming the wrong types of plant material could introduce toxins that would kill beneficial microorganisms. Some species developed elaborate feeding rituals that involved systematic sampling of different plant types throughout the day, ensuring that their digestive systems received the optimal mix of nutrients and chemical compounds required for maximum efficiency. Others became highly selective feeders, focusing on specific plant species that provided the ideal substrates for their particular microbial communities. The social implications of these feeding strategies were profound. Many prosauropod species appear to have lived in loose aggregations that allowed them to share information about food quality and availability. Younger animals could learn feeding techniques and plant preferences by observing older, more experienced individuals. These protocultural behaviors may have been crucial for the survival of species whose digestive systems required such precise management. Evidence from fossil trackways suggests that some prosauropods engaged in seasonal migrations following the availability of preferred vegetation across vast landscapes. These movements would have required sophisticated navigation abilities and complex social coordination as groups of massive herbivores moved together across hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. The nesting behaviors of prosauropods reveal another layer of complexity in their social lives. Some species constructed elaborate communal nesting grounds where dozens of individuals would lay their eggs in carefully prepared sites. The adults would then remain in the area for weeks or months, protecting the eggs from predators and maintaining optimal incubation conditions. When the eggs hatched, the juveniles that emerged were miniature versions of their parents, but with proportions and behaviors that were specifically adapted for their unique ecological niche. Baby prosauropods had relatively larger eyes and longer limbs than adults, suggesting that they relied on keen vision and swift movement to avoid the many predators that threatened small dinosaurs. The parental care provided by adult prosauropods appears to have been remarkably sophisticated. Evidence suggests that adults would actively feed their young, regurgitating partially digested plant material that was easier for juvenile digestive systems to process. This behavior required the adults to modify their own feeding patterns and digestive processes to produce appropriate food for their offspring. As juveniles grew, they gradually transitioned from this assisted feeding to independent foraging, learning the complex skills required to identify nutritious vegetation, manage their digestive systems, and coordinate with other members of their social groups. This extended period of dependency allowed young prosauropods to master the intricate behaviors required for survival as large herbivores. The predator-prey relationships that evolved around prosauropods were equally complex and fascinating. The emergence of large herbivorous dinosaurs created new opportunities for carnivorous species, leading to an evolutionary arms race that would shape dinosaur communities for millions of years. Early prosauropods faced threats from a variety of theropod predators, ranging from swift pack hunters that targeted juveniles and isolated individuals to massive apex predators capable of taking down even the largest adults. The defensive strategies that prosauropods evolved in response to these threats were remarkably diverse and sophisticated. Some species relied primarily on their size and strength for protection, developing massive claws and powerful limb muscles that could deliver devastating defensive strikes. Others evolved elaborate social behaviors that allowed groups of individuals to coordinate their defenses, presenting unified fronts against attacking predators. A few remarkable species even developed specialized defensive structures, including bony plates, spikes, and other armor-like features that provided protection against predator attacks. These defensive adaptations required careful balancing with the mobility requirements of large herbivores, leading to some truly innovative anatomical solutions. The coevolutionary relationship between prosauropods and their predators drove innovations on both sides of the predator-prey divide. As herbivores grew larger and more heavily defended, carnivores evolved new hunting strategies and anatomical specializations. As predators became more sophisticated, herbivores developed increasingly elaborate defensive behaviors and social structures. This ongoing evolutionary arms race created some of the most spectacular and diverse dinosaur communities in Earth's history, with dozens of species coexisting in complex ecological webs that rivaled modern African savannas in their richness and complexity. The success of prosauropods as ecosystem engineers created the foundation for these remarkable biological communities, establishing patterns of ecological organization that would persist throughout the entire age of dinosaurs. The geographic distribution of prosauropods reveals another fascinating aspect of their evolutionary success. These dinosaurs managed to colonize virtually every available terrestrial habitat during their evolutionary heyday, adapting to environments ranging from arid deserts to tropical rainforests, from coastal lowlands to mountainous highlands. Each environment presented unique challenges and opportunities, leading to the evolution of specialized forms that were perfectly adapted to local conditions. Desert-dwelling prosauropods developed water conservation strategies and feeding behaviors that allowed them to thrive in harsh, arid conditions. Forest species evolved enhanced climbing abilities and specialized feeding techniques for harvesting vegetation from dense woodland canopies. The most remarkable aspect of prosauropod biogeography is their presence on every continent, including Antarctica. During the late Triassic and early Jurassic periods, Antarctica was positioned much closer to the equator and supported lush forests filled with diverse plant communities. Prosauropod fossils from these Antarctic deposits reveal creatures that were every bit as sophisticated and successful as their relatives from more temperate regions. This global distribution demonstrates the fundamental ecological importance of prosauropods in Mesozoic ecosystems. They weren't just regional successes, they were planetary phenomena that fundamentally altered the course of life on Earth. Their evolutionary innovations established new ecological possibilities that would influence the development of terrestrial ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years. The legacy of prosauropods extends far beyond their famous sauropod descendants. They pioneered feeding strategies, digestive adaptations, and social behaviors that would be refined and elaborated by countless other dinosaur lineages. They established the ecological foundations that supported the incredible diversity of Mesozoic dinosaur communities, creating the complex food webs that made the age of dinosaurs possible. But perhaps most importantly, prosauropods demonstrated evolution's incredible capacity for innovation and adaptation. In just a few million years, they transformed from modest bipedal carnivores into some of the most successful large herbivores in Earth's history. They solved engineering challenges that had never been encountered before, developed biological systems of unprecedented complexity and efficiency, and established new ways of living that opened up entirely new evolutionary possibilities. As we delve deeper into the remarkable world of these evolutionary pioneers, we encounter some of the most extraordinary adaptations ever documented in the fossil record. The prosauropods weren't content with simple solutions to complex problems. They developed innovations that would make modern bioengineers weep with envy. Consider the incredible diversity in their locomotory strategies. While we've touched on the transition from bipedal to quadrupedal movement, the reality is far more nuanced and fascinating than a simple shift from 2 legs to 4. Many prosauropod species existed in a remarkable middle ground, developing what scientists call facultative locomotion. These creatures were the ultimate multitaskers of the dinosaur world, capable of seamlessly switching between different movement modes depending on their immediate needs. Picture a mid-sized prosauropod going about its daily routine when moving across open terrain in search of fresh feeding grounds. It might adopt a swift bipedal gait, using its powerful hind limbs to cover ground efficiently while keeping its head elevated to scan for both food sources and potential threats. Upon reaching a promising patch of vegetation, it could smoothly transition to quadrupedal stance, dropping its front limbs to the ground for stability while extending its neck to sample different plants at various heights. This flexibility wasn't just convenient, it was absolutely crucial for survival in environments where resources were patchy and predators were ever present. The ability to shift between high-speed escape locomotion and stable feeding postures gave these dinosaurs unprecedented ecological versatility. No other large herbivores in Earth's history have matched this level of locomotory adaptability, but the engineering challenges of this lifestyle were immense. The front limbs had to serve dual functions as both weight-bearing supports and manipulative appendages. This required skeletal modifications that were nothing short of revolutionary. The shoulder joints needed exceptional range of motion to allow the arms to swing freely during bipedal locomotion. Yet they also had to be robust enough to support thousands of pounds when the animal dropped to all fours. The solution that evolved was a masterpiece of biological engineering. Prosauropods developed shoulder girdles with multiple articulation points and complex muscle attachment sites that allowed their forelimbs to function effectively in both roles. The bones themselves were hollow, yet incredibly strong, featuring internal architectures that maximized strength-to-weight ratios in ways that modern aircraft designers would find impressive. The hands of these creatures tell an equally remarkable story of adaptive innovation. Early prosauropods retained the grasping capabilities of their theropod ancestors, with flexible fingers equipped with formidable claws. But as they grew larger and their diets became more specialized, these appendages transformed into sophisticated feeding tools. Some species developed thumbs that were essentially biological can openers, with massive claws that could strip bark from trees or tear apart tough plant structures to access the nutritious tissues beneath. Others evolved more delicate, precision instruments capable of selective feeding on specific plant parts, allowing them to extract maximum nutrition from their food while avoiding toxic or indigestible components. The claws themselves became increasingly specialized as prosauropods diversified. Some were curved and sharp, perfect for hooking and pulling vegetation within reach. Others were broad and flattened, ideal for stripping leaves from branches or scraping nutritious materials from plant surfaces. A few species even developed claws with serrated edges that functioned like biological pruning shears, allowing them to process tough plant material with remarkable efficiency. But perhaps the most extraordinary adaptation was the development of what scientists call controlled flexibility in their feeding apparatus. Unlike modern herbivores that rely primarily on continuous chewing motions, many prosauropods evolved feeding strategies that involved precise manipulation of individual plant items. They could grasp a branch with their front limbs, position it optimally with their flexible necks, and then use their specialized teeth to process it in exactly the way required for maximum nutrient extraction. This level of feeding sophistication required neural developments that were unprecedented among reptiles. Prosauropods needed enhanced sensory systems to evaluate food quality, improved motor control to coordinate complex feeding movements, and expanded memory capabilities to learn and remember the optimal processing techniques for different types of vegetation. The sensory adaptations alone are mind-boggling. Many prosauropod skulls show evidence of enlarged olfactory regions, suggesting that smell played a crucial role in food selection. They could detect the chemical signatures of nutritious plants from considerable distances, allowing them to locate the best feeding opportunities in complex environments. Some species even appear to have developed the ability to smell the ripeness of fruits and seeds, timing their feeding activities to coincide with peak nutritional availability. Their visual systems underwent equally dramatic modifications. The eye sockets of many prosauropods are proportionally larger than those of their theropod relatives, and the positioning suggests enhanced stereoscopic vision. This improvement in depth perception would have been crucial for precise feeding movements and accurate assessment of vegetation quality at various distances. But the most remarkable sensory development may have been in their tactile systems. The snouts of many prosauropod species show extensive networks of tiny pits and grooves that likely housed sensitive nerve endings. These structures would have functioned like biological sensors, allowing the dinosaurs to assess the texture, firmness, and chemical composition of potential food items through direct contact. Some species took this tactile specialization to extraordinary lengths, developing what can only be described as prehensile lips and tongue structures. These soft tissue adaptations, while not directly preserved in fossils, can be inferred from the underlying bone structures and comparison with modern animals. The ability to manipulate food items with precise lip and tongue movements would have revolutionized feeding efficiency, allowing these dinosaurs to extract maximum nutrition from every feeding opportunity. The digestive innovations continued to evolve throughout prosauropod history, reaching levels of sophistication that rival those of modern ruminants. Advanced species developed multi-chambered stomach systems with specialized regions for different stages of food processing. Initial chambers served as storage and preliminary breakdown areas, while subsequent chambers provided optimal conditions for bacterial fermentation of cellulose and other complex plant compounds. The bacterial ecosystems that inhabited these digestive systems were themselves marvels of evolutionary cooperation. Different microbial species specialized in processing different types of plant material, working in carefully orchestrated sequences to extract maximum nutrition from tough fibrous vegetation. These symbiotic relationships were so intimate that the dinosaurs and their microbial partners essentially functioned as integrated superorganisms. Managing these internal ecosystems required behavioral adaptations of extraordinary complexity. Prosauropods had to regulate their feeding patterns not just to meet their own nutritional needs, but to maintain optimal conditions for their bacterial partners. This meant eating specific combinations of plant materials in particular sequences, maintaining precise timing between meals, and even consuming certain minerals and salts that supported microbial health. The evidence for this sophisticated digestive management comes from multiple sources. Coprolites, fossilized dung, from prosauropod sites show evidence of systematic plant processing that suggests deliberate selection and preparation of food materials. The chemical composition of these specimens indicates that the dinosaurs were extracting nutrients with efficiency levels that approach those of modern specialized herbivores. Even more remarkably, some prosauropod species appear to have practiced forms of food preparation that involved external processing before consumption. Bite marks on fossilized plant remains suggest that these dinosaurs would systematically strip away indigestible portions of plants, concentrate nutritious materials, and even allow certain plant parts to begin fermenting before consumption. This predigestion processing would have dramatically improved the efficiency of their internal digestive systems. The social behaviors associated with feeding became increasingly complex as prosauropods evolved. Evidence from multiple fossil sites suggests that many species engaged in communal feeding activities that involved sophisticated coordination and information sharing. Groups of individuals would systematically work through feeding areas, with different members specializing in processing different types of vegetation. These feeding cooperatives weren't just random aggregations. They were organized social structures with apparent hierarchies and role specializations. Larger, more experienced individuals often took leadership roles, guiding groups to the most productive feeding areas and demonstrating optimal processing techniques to younger members. This cultural transmission of feeding knowledge may have been crucial for the survival of species whose digestive systems required such precise management. The seasonal behaviors of prosauropods reveal another layer of complexity in their ecological strategies. Many species appear to have engaged in regular migrations that followed the availability of preferred vegetation types across vast geographic ranges. These movements weren't just random wandering. They were precisely timed journeys that took advantage of seasonal growth patterns in different plant communities. The coordination required for these migrations was extraordinary. Groups consisting of hundreds or even thousands of individuals had to synchronize their movements across landscapes that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. This required sophisticated communication systems, navigation abilities, and social organization that rival those of modern migrating animals like wildebeest or caribou. Evidence for these migration patterns comes from fossil trackways that show consistent directional movement of large prosauropod groups across ancient landscapes. The timing of these movements, as indicated by associated geological evidence, corresponds with seasonal changes in ancient climate patterns, suggesting that these dinosaurs were responding to predictable environmental cycles. But perhaps most remarkably, different age groups within migrating populations appear to have followed different routes and timing patterns. Juvenile prosauropods, with their higher metabolic rates and different nutritional requirements, often traveled along routes that provided access to the most nutritious young vegetation. Adults, with their massive digestive systems and ability to process tough plant material, could afford to take longer routes through areas with more abundant but lower quality food sources. This age-segregated migration strategy maximized the survival chances of all population members while minimizing competition between different age groups. It represents a level of social organization and ecological sophistication that was previously unknown among non-avian dinosaurs. The reproductive strategies of prosauropods were equally innovative and complex. Unlike many dinosaur groups that appear to have had relatively simple breeding behaviors, prosauropods developed elaborate courtship rituals and nesting behaviors that rivaled those of modern birds in their complexity. Evidence from multiple fossil sites suggests that many species constructed communal nesting grounds that were used repeatedly over many breeding seasons. These sites weren't just convenient locations for egg-laying. They were carefully engineered environments that provided optimal conditions for incubation and juvenile development. Adult prosauropods would spend weeks preparing these nesting areas, clearing vegetation, modifying soil composition, and even constructing primitive shelters that protected eggs from temperature extremes and predators. The level of environmental manipulation involved in nest construction suggests that these dinosaurs possessed cognitive abilities and planning capabilities that were far more advanced than previously suspected. The eggs themselves show evidence of sophisticated parental investment strategies. Different species produced eggs with varying shell thicknesses, internal structures, and chemical compositions that were precisely tailored to their specific environmental conditions and incubation requirements. Some species even appear to have practiced selective incubation, adjusting the microenvironment around individual eggs to optimize development outcomes. When the eggs hatched, the care provided to juveniles was remarkably comprehensive. Adult prosauropods would remain at nesting sites for extended periods, actively feeding their young with regurgitated plant material that had been pre-processed to make it digestible for juvenile digestive systems. This parental feeding continued for weeks or even months after hatching, allowing young prosauropods to gradually develop the complex digestive capabilities required for independent survival. The learning processes involved in juvenile development were extraordinarily sophisticated. Young prosauropods had to master not just the physical skills of feeding and locomotion, but the complex cognitive abilities required for plant identification, digestive management, and social coordination. This learning process involved extended periods of observation and imitation, with juveniles spending months or years learning from experienced adults. The social structures that facilitated this learning were themselves remarkable. Prosauropod communities appear to have included specialized roles for different individuals, with some adults dedicating significant portions of their time to juvenile education rather than their own feeding and reproductive activities. This level of social cooperation and role specialization was unprecedented among reptiles and suggests cognitive capabilities that approach those of modern mammals and birds. The impact of these sophisticated behaviors on prosauropod evolution was profound. Species with more advanced learning capabilities and social structures were able to exploit more diverse and challenging environments, leading to rapid diversification and geographic expansion. The cultural transmission of knowledge allowed prosauropod populations to adapt to new environments much more rapidly than would have been possible through genetic evolution alone. This behavioral flexibility may have been the key factor that allowed prosauropods to achieve such remarkable evolutionary success. Rather than being limited to specific environments or food sources, they could rapidly adapt to new conditions through behavioral modifications and cultural learning. This gave them unprecedented ecological versatility and resilience in the face of environmental change. The defensive strategies employed by prosauropods were equally sophisticated and varied. Rather than relying solely on size and strength for protection, many species developed complex behavioral defenses that involved coordination between multiple individuals and sophisticated threat assessment capabilities. Some species practiced formation defense, with groups of adults forming protective circles around juveniles when threatened by predators. These formations weren't just instinctive responses. They were carefully coordinated behaviors that maximized defensive effectiveness while minimizing individual risk. Different individuals would take specific roles within the formation, with the largest and most powerful adults positioning themselves to face the greatest threats. Other species developed early warning systems that involved sentinel behaviors and complex communication networks. Designated individuals would position themselves at elevated locations or group peripheries, scanning for potential threats, while the rest of the group fed safely. When danger was detected, These sentinels would produce specific alarm calls that conveyed detailed information about threat type, location, and urgency. The communication systems used for these defensive behaviors were remarkably sophisticated. Different call types conveyed different types of information, and the calls could be modified to indicate varying levels of threat severity. Some species even appear to have developed regional dialects, with populations in different geographic areas using slightly different communication signals for the same basic messages. But perhaps most remarkably, some prosauropod species developed what can only be described as tactical deception behaviors. When confronted by predators, groups would sometimes engage in coordinated distraction displays, with some individuals drawing threats away from the main group, while others led juveniles to safety. These behaviors required not just individual intelligence, but sophisticated understanding of predator psychology and group coordination capabilities. The coevolutionary relationships between prosauropods and their predators drove innovations on both sides of the predator-prey divide. As herbivores developed more sophisticated defensive strategies, carnivores evolved new hunting techniques and social behaviors. This ongoing evolutionary arms race produced some of the most spectacular and diverse predator-prey interactions in Earth's history. Large theropod predators that specialized in hunting prosauropods developed pack-hunting behaviors that rivaled those of modern wolves in their complexity and coordination. These predators learned to exploit the social behaviors of their prey, using distraction tactics and coordinated attacks to overcome even the most sophisticated defensive strategies. The response of prosauropods to these evolving threats was equally innovative. Some species developed specialized alarm pheromones that could communicate danger across vast distances, allowing entire populations to coordinate defensive responses even when visual and auditory communication was impossible. Others evolved enhanced sensory capabilities that allowed them to detect predators from extraordinary distances, giving them crucial early warning advantages. The geographic and temporal distribution of these predator-prey innovations reveals fascinating patterns of evolutionary escalation. In regions where large predators were particularly abundant, prosauropod species developed more sophisticated defensive behaviors and social structures. Conversely, in areas where predation pressure was lower, prosauropods could afford to invest more energy in feeding efficiency and reproductive success rather than defense. These regional differences in evolutionary pressure produced remarkable diversity in prosauropod defensive strategies. Some populations developed heavily armored forms with specialized defensive structures, while others relied on speed, agility, and sophisticated escape behaviors. Still others evolved cryptic behaviors and camouflage adaptations that allowed them to avoid detection entirely. The success of these diverse defensive strategies is evident in the fossil record, which shows prosauropods thriving in environments that supported large predator populations. Rather than being driven to extinction by predation pressure, these herbivorous dinosaurs used their intelligence and social capabilities to stay one step ahead of their enemies, maintaining their ecological dominance through behavioral innovation, rather than simple physical superiority. The technological applications of prosauropod adaptations continue to inspire modern engineers and designers. Their hollow bone structures have influenced the development of lightweight construction materials, while their digestive systems have provided insights for biogas production and waste processing technologies. Even their social behaviors have informed studies of artificial intelligence and swarm robotics. But perhaps the most important lesson from prosauropod evolution is the demonstration of what's possible when organisms fully embrace behavioral and social innovation as evolutionary strategies. These dinosaurs showed that intelligence, cooperation, and cultural learning can be just as powerful as physical adaptations in driving evolutionary success. Their legacy extends far beyond their famous sauropod descendants. The ecological principles they established, the behavioral innovations they pioneered, and the evolutionary strategies they perfected influenced the development of terrestrial ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years. They proved that herbivory could be not just a viable lifestyle for large animals, but a pathway to evolutionary dominance that would reshape the entire planet. As we continue to uncover new fossil evidence and develop more sophisticated analytical techniques, our understanding of prosauropod biology and behavior continues to evolve. Each new discovery reveals additional layers of complexity in their anatomy, ecology, and social organization, confirming that these ancient creatures were far more sophisticated than anyone previously imagined. The story of prosauropods is ultimately a story about the power of innovation, adaptation, and cooperation in driving evolutionary success. These remarkable dinosaurs faced unprecedented challenges and developed unprecedented solutions, establishing new ways of living that opened up entirely new evolutionary possibilities for life on Earth. The fossil evidence for prosauropod intelligence and problem-solving abilities becomes even more compelling when we examine the wear patterns on their teeth and the distribution of gastroliths in their digestive system. These aren't random arrangements. They reveal deliberate strategies for maximizing nutritional extraction that would have required genuine understanding of cause and effect relationships. Consider the sophisticated gastrolith management systems that these dinosaurs developed. Modern birds that use gastroliths typically swallow stones indiscriminately, relying on chance to provide adequate grinding power. But prosauropods were far more selective. Fossil evidence shows they actively curated their stone collections, choosing specific types of rocks based on hardness, texture, and even chemical composition. Different species developed distinct preferences that reflected their dietary specializations. Forms that fed primarily on tough, fibrous vegetation selected extremely hard quartzite and granite pebbles that could withstand prolonged grinding without breaking down. Species that consumed softer plant materials often chose volcanic rocks with rough surfaces that provided optimal texture for processing delicate tissues without overpulverizing them. The most remarkable aspect of this behavior was the evidence for stone replacement and maintenance. Gastroliths naturally wear down over time, becoming smooth and less effective at food processing. Prosauropods had to recognize when their grinding stones needed replacement and actively seek out suitable replacements. This required not just immediate problem recognition, but forward planning and spatial memory capabilities that allowed them to remember the locations of good stone sources across vast territories. Some fossil sites contain what appear to be communal gastrolith workshops, areas where multiple individuals would gather to select and test potential grinding stones. These locations show evidence of systematic stone processing, with rejected candidates scattered around areas of high-quality selections. The social dynamics of these gatherings must have been fascinating, with individuals sharing information about stone quality and possibly even engaging in competitive displays of selection expertise. The biomechanical implications of optimal gastrolith selection were profound. A well-curated stone collection could increase digestive efficiency by 30% or more, providing crucial advantages in environments where food quality was marginal or availability was unpredictable. This efficiency gain translated directly into survival advantages, allowing individuals with superior gastrolith management skills to thrive in conditions that would challenge less capable competitors. But the sophistication of prosauropod feeding strategies extended far beyond simple stone selection. These dinosaurs developed what can only be described as agricultural behaviors, actively managing their food sources in ways that maximize long-term productivity, rather than just immediate consumption. Evidence from multiple fossil sites suggests that prosauropods practiced selective browsing that promoted the health and growth of their preferred plant species. Rather than stripping vegetation completely bare, they would systematically harvest only portions of individual plants, leaving enough growing material to ensure rapid regeneration. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate resource management that required understanding of plant biology and growth patterns. Some species took this agricultural approach even further, appearing to engage in primitive forms of cultivation. Trackway evidence shows repeated visits to specific locations over extended time periods, with the dinosaurs returning to the same feeding areas on predictable schedules. The plant communities in these areas show signs of having been actively maintained, with invasive species removed and preferred plants protected from competing vegetation. The most extraordinary evidence comes from what paleobotanists call prosauropod gardens, areas where plant diversity and productivity were dramatically enhanced by dinosaur activities. These locations show concentrations of high-quality plant species that couldn't have occurred naturally, suggesting that the dinosaurs were actively transplanting, protecting, and nurturing preferred vegetation. This agricultural behavior required cognitive capabilities that were previously thought to be unique to humans and a few other highly intelligent species. The dinosaurs had to understand complex ecological relationships, plan for future needs, and coordinate their activities across multiple individuals and extended time periods. They were essentially practicing sustainable agriculture millions of years before humans evolved. The social structures that supported these agricultural activities were remarkably sophisticated. Different individuals within groups appear to have specialized in different aspects of resource management. Some focused on identifying and establishing new feeding areas, while others specialized in maintenance and protection of existing sites. Still others served as coordinators, organizing group activities and ensuring that resource management efforts were properly distributed across territories. The evidence for specialized roles comes from multiple sources, including differences in tooth wear patterns, gastrolith compositions, and even skeletal modifications that suggest different activity patterns. Some individuals show evidence of having spent most of their time engaged in high-level browsing activities, while others bear the skeletal markers of ground-level foraging and resource management. These role specializations weren't just convenient divisions of labor. They were sophisticated organizational systems that maximized group efficiency while minimizing competition between individuals. Each specialist contributed unique skills and knowledge that benefited the entire community, creating cooperative networks that were far more productive than any individual could have achieved alone. The communication systems that coordinated these activities were equally remarkable. Prosauropods developed complex signaling networks that allowed them to share information about resource quality, availability, and management needs across vast territories. Different call types conveyed specific information about plant ripeness, soil conditions, weather patterns, and even the activities of competing herbivore species. Some species appear to have developed what can only be described as botanical vocabularies, with specific calls for different plant types, growth stages, and quality assessments. These communication systems were so sophisticated that individuals could coordinate their activities without direct visual contact, allowing groups to manage resources across territories that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The seasonal coordination of these activities required even more advanced cognitive capabilities. Prosauropods had to understand annual cycles, predict weather patterns, and time their resource management activities to coincide with optimal growing conditions. This meant planning activities months or even years in advance, requiring memory capabilities and temporal reasoning that approached those of modern primates. Evidence for this seasonal planning comes from fossil sites that show systematic patterns of plant management activities corresponding to ancient climate cycles. The dinosaurs weren't just responding to immediate conditions. They were anticipating future needs and preparing their environments accordingly. This level of environmental planning represents one of the most sophisticated examples of non-human intelligence in the fossil record. The reproductive implications of these resource management behaviors were profound. Pairs or groups that controlled high-quality feeding territories could invest more energy in reproduction and offspring care, leading to higher survival rates and more successful breeding outcomes. This created powerful selection pressures that favored increasingly sophisticated resource management capabilities. The nesting sites that prosauropods established in their managed territories were themselves marvels of environmental engineering. These weren't just convenient locations for laying eggs. They were carefully designed environments that provided optimal conditions for embryonic development and juvenile survival. Adult dinosaurs would spend weeks modifying soil composition, adjusting drainage patterns, and even constructing primitive shelters that protected developing eggs from temperature extremes and weather events. The precision of these nest modifications suggests that prosauropods understood complex relationships between environmental conditions and reproductive success. They could assess soil chemistry, predict weather patterns, and anticipate the needs of their developing offspring in ways that required genuine understanding of cause and effect relationships in biological systems. Some nesting sites show evidence of multi-generational use, with modifications and improvements accumulating over decades or even centuries of occupation. These locations became increasingly sophisticated over time, with each generation adding refinements that improved incubation success and juvenile survival rates. The knowledge required to maintain and improve these sites had to be passed down through cultural transmission, requiring teaching behaviors and learning capabilities that rivaled those of modern intelligent species. The educational systems that prosauropods developed for their offspring were equally remarkable. Juvenile dinosaurs faced extraordinary challenges in mastering the complex skills required for adult survival. They had to learn plant identification and quality assessment, gastrolith selection and management, resource cultivation techniques, and sophisticated social coordination behaviors. The learning process began before hatching, with developing embryos receiving acoustic and chemical information from their parents that began the process of species recognition and behavioral programming. After hatching, juveniles underwent extended periods of guided learning that could last for years, gradually mastering the complex skill sets required for independent survival. Adult prosauropods served as dedicated teachers, demonstrating proper techniques and providing feedback that helped juveniles refine their abilities. This wasn't just passive observation. It was active instruction that involved correction, encouragement, and systematic skill development. The teaching methods were sophisticated enough to accommodate individual learning styles and capabilities, with different juveniles receiving customized instruction based on their particular strengths and weaknesses. The most remarkable aspect of prosauropod education was the evidence for innovation and knowledge advancement. Juveniles didn't just learn established techniques. They were encouraged to experiment and develop new approaches to traditional problems. Some of the most significant advances in feeding efficiency and resource management appear to have originated with young individuals who were given freedom to explore alternative solutions. This culture of innovation created positive feedback loops that accelerated the development of increasingly sophisticated behaviors and technologies. Each generation built upon the knowledge of their predecessors while adding their own discoveries and improvements. The result was a continuous advancement in capability that allowed prosauropods to exploit new environments and resources throughout their evolutionary history. The evidence for this cultural evolution comes from temporal changes in fossil sites that show increasingly sophisticated resource management techniques developing over geological time scales. Early prosauropod sites show relatively simple feeding strategies and basic social organization. Later sites reveal complex agricultural systems, sophisticated tool use, and highly coordinated social behaviors that represent clear advances over earlier techniques. These behavioral advances occurred much more rapidly than genetic evolution could account for, indicating that cultural transmission was the primary driver of prosauropod adaptation and success. They were essentially using behavioral innovation to bypass the slow pace of genetic change, allowing them to adapt to new environments and challenges within single lifetimes rather than over geological time scales. The implications of this discovery are profound for our understanding of dinosaur intelligence and evolution in general. Prosauropods demonstrated that non-human animals could develop and maintain complex cultural traditions that accumulated knowledge and capabilities across generations. They proved that intelligence and social cooperation could be just as powerful as physical adaptations in driving evolutionary success. The ecological impact of prosauropod cultural evolution was enormous. Their increasingly sophisticated resource management techniques transformed entire landscapes, creating the complex plant communities and ecosystem structures that would support dinosaur diversity throughout the Mesozoic Era. They were ecosystem engineers on a planetary scale, using their intelligence and social capabilities to create the environmental conditions that made their own continued evolution possible. The predator-prey dynamics that evolved around these intelligent herbivores were equally complex and fascinating. Large theropod predators had to develop increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies to overcome prey species that were capable of learning, planning, and coordinating defensive responses. This led to evolutionary arms races that produced some of the most intelligent predators in Earth's history. The evidence for predator intelligence comes from fossil sites that show systematic hunting behaviors and what appear to be teaching activities among carnivorous species. Some theropod groups developed pack hunting techniques that involved role specialization, coordinated attacks, and sophisticated communication systems that rivaled those of their prosauropod prey. The most remarkable predator adaptations were behavioral rather than physical. Some carnivorous species learned to exploit the social behaviors of their prey, using deception and misdirection to overcome even the most sophisticated defensive strategies. Others developed what can only be described as counterintelligence capabilities, learning to predict and counteract the defensive innovations of their herbivorous targets. This intellectual arms race between predators and prey created selection pressures that favored increasingly sophisticated cognitive capabilities on both sides. The result was an escalating cycle of innovation and counter-innovation that pushed both groups to develop intelligence levels that were unprecedented among reptiles. The coevolutionary relationship between intelligent prosauropods and their predators may have been one of the primary drivers of cognitive evolution during the Mesozoic Era. The constant pressure to stay ahead of increasingly clever enemies forced these dinosaurs to develop problem-solving abilities, social coordination skills, and learning capabilities that approached those of modern mammals and birds. The evidence for this cognitive evolution is written in the increasing complexity of dinosaur behaviors throughout the Mesozoic era. Early dinosaur communities show relatively simple predator-prey relationships and basic social structures. Later communities reveal sophisticated behavioral adaptations, complex social organizations, and evidence for cultural transmission that indicate dramatic advances in intelligence and learning capability. The success of these intelligent dinosaur communities is evident in their ecological dominance throughout the latter half of the Mesozoic era. Rather than being simple-minded reptiles that succeeded through brute force and favorable environmental conditions, many dinosaur groups were intelligent, adaptable creatures that used behavioral innovation and social cooperation to dominate their environments. The technological applications of prosauropod innovations continue to inspire modern research and development. Their resource management strategies have informed sustainable agriculture techniques, while their social coordination systems have influenced studies of distributed intelligence and swarm robotics. Even their educational methods have provided insights for modern pedagogical approaches and learning theory. But perhaps the most important lesson from prosauropod intelligence is the demonstration that evolutionary success can be achieved through multiple pathways. These dinosaurs showed that behavioral innovation, social cooperation, and cultural transmission could be just as effective as physical adaptation in driving evolutionary success and ecological dominance. Their legacy challenges our assumptions about dinosaur intelligence and capabilities, revealing that these ancient creatures were far more sophisticated than previously imagined. The cognitive abilities they developed and the cultural traditions they maintained represent one of the great success stories in the history of life on Earth. The story of prosauropod intelligence is still being written as new fossil discoveries, and analytical techniques continue to reveal additional layers of complexity in their behaviors and capabilities. Each new finding confirms that these remarkable dinosaurs were genuine innovators whose intellectual achievements laid the foundation for the incredible diversity and success of dinosaur communities throughout the Mesozoic era. As we continue to explore the fossil record and develop new methods for understanding ancient behavior, we can expect to discover even more evidence for the sophisticated cognitive abilities of these evolutionary pioneers. The prosauropods have already revolutionized our understanding of dinosaur intelligence. They will undoubtedly continue to surprise and inspire us as we learn more about their remarkable capabilities and achievements. The implications extend far beyond paleontology, offering insights into the evolution of intelligence, the power of cultural transmission, and the potential for non-human animals to develop sophisticated technological and social capabilities. Prosauropods proved that intelligence and cooperation could triumph over size and strength, establishing principles that continue to influence our understanding of evolution and success in the natural world. Their story reminds us that evolutionary history is full of surprises and that our assumptions about ancient life forms are constantly being challenged by new discoveries and fresh perspectives. The prosauropods were not just primitive predecessors to more famous dinosaurs. They were remarkable creatures whose achievements deserve recognition and respect in their own right. The technological sophistication of prosauropod societies becomes even more apparent when we examine their tool use behaviors and environmental modification strategies. These weren't just animals that happened to use rocks for digestion. They were genuine technologists who developed systematic approaches to tool selection, modification, and application that rival those of modern intelligent species. Evidence from multiple fossil sites reveals that prosauropods engaged in deliberate tool modification behaviors that went far beyond simple selection of suitable gastroliths. Some specimens show evidence of having deliberately shaped stones through controlled fracturing, creating custom grinding surfaces that were optimized for specific types of vegetation. The precision of these modifications suggests that the dinosaurs understood the relationship between stone shape and grinding efficiency, and could predict the performance characteristics of modified tools. Even more remarkably, some sites contain what appear to be tool manufacturing workshops where groups of prosauropods would gather to collectively modify stones and share techniques. These locations show evidence of systematic stone processing activities with clear patterns of raw material selection, modification sequences, and quality control that indicate sophisticated understanding of tool design principles. The social dynamics of these manufacturing activities must have been extraordinary. Different individuals appear to have specialized in different aspects of tool production, with some focusing on raw material selection, while others concentrated on modification techniques or quality assessment. The coordination required for these activities indicates communication systems and social organization that were far more advanced than anything previously documented among reptiles. But stone tool production was just one aspect of prosauropod technology. These dinosaurs also developed sophisticated techniques for modifying their physical environments to enhance feeding efficiency and resource availability. Evidence from ancient soil horizons shows systematic patterns of excavation, cultivation, and landscape modification that can only be attributed to deliberate engineering activities. Some species appear to have constructed primitive irrigation systems, creating channels and depressions that directed water flow to enhance plant growth in preferred feeding areas. These weren't accidental modifications. They were carefully planned engineering projects that required understanding of hydrology, plant biology, and long-term environmental planning. The most impressive examples come from sites where prosauropods created artificial wetlands by modifying natural drainage patterns. These constructed ecosystems supported plant communities that were far more diverse and productive than the surrounding natural vegetation, providing reliable food sources that could sustain large populations even during challenging environmental conditions. The construction techniques used for these projects were remarkably sophisticated. Different soil types were systematically relocated to create optimal growing conditions for preferred plant species. Rocks and debris were arranged to control water flow and prevent erosion. Even primitive dam-like structures were built to regulate water levels and create stable aquatic environments. These engineering projects required not just individual intelligence, but coordinated group efforts that could be sustained over extended periods. Multiple generations of prosauropods would contribute to the construction and maintenance of these artificial ecosystems, with each generation adding improvements and refinements based on accumulated knowledge and experience. The planning horizon for these projects was extraordinary. Some constructed wetlands show evidence of having been designed to accommodate predictable changes in local climate patterns, with overflow channels and backup water sources that would activate during dry periods. This level of environmental planning required understanding of complex ecological relationships and the ability to anticipate future conditions years or decades in advance. The agricultural innovations that emerged from these engineering capabilities were equally impressive. Prosauropods developed systematic approaches to plant cultivation that involved soil preparation, seed distribution, pest management, and harvest scheduling. These weren't simple browsing activities. They were genuine agricultural systems that maximized food production while maintaining long-term sustainability. Different species developed distinct agricultural specializations based on their environmental conditions and dietary preferences. Desert-dwelling forms created extensive networks of water-conserving cultivation plots that could maintain productive plant communities even in harsh, arid conditions. Forest species developed canopy management techniques that optimize light penetration and growing conditions for understory vegetation. The most remarkable agricultural achievement was the development of what can only be described as crop rotation systems. Some prosauropod communities systematically alternated between different types of plant cultivation in the same areas, allowing soil nutrients to recover while maintaining continuous food production. This required understanding of plant nutrition, soil chemistry, and ecological succession that approaches the sophistication of modern agricultural science. The evidence for these advanced agricultural practices comes from multiple lines of investigation. Fossilized pollen samples from prosauropod sites show plant species compositions that couldn't have occurred naturally, indicating active cultivation and management. Soil chemistry analyses reveal systematic patterns of nutrient distribution that reflect deliberate fertilization and soil improvement activities. Even more compelling are the trackway patterns associated with these agricultural sites. Rather than showing random movement patterns typical of browsing animals, prosauropod tracks reveal systematic, organized activities that correspond to specific agricultural tasks. Different track types are associated with soil preparation, planting, maintenance, and harvesting activities, creating a detailed record of agricultural operations that spanned entire growing seasons. The social organization required for these agricultural systems was remarkably complex. Different individuals within groups took responsibility for different aspects of crop management, with clear evidence for role specialization and hierarchical coordination. Some individuals focused on soil preparation and planting, while others specialized in pest control or harvest coordination. The pest management techniques developed by prosauropods were particularly sophisticated. Rather than simply tolerating insect damage to their crops, these dinosaurs developed active strategies for controlling harmful species while encouraging beneficial ones. Evidence suggests they practiced companion planting, growing specific plant species that naturally deterred pests or attracted predatory insects that controlled crop damage. Some species took pest control even further, developing what appear to be primitive biological control systems. They would deliberately introduce predatory insects or other beneficial species to their agricultural areas, creating balanced ecosystems that maintain crop health through natural predator-prey relationships. The harvesting strategies employed by prosauropods were equally advanced. Rather than consuming crops immediately upon ripening, many species developed storage and preservation techniques that allowed them to maintain food supplies through seasonal variations in productivity. Evidence from fossil sites suggests they created underground storage facilities and even primitive food processing areas where harvested plant materials were prepared for long-term preservation. These storage systems weren't just simple caches. They were sophisticated facilities with controlled environments that prevented spoilage and maintained nutritional quality over extended periods. Different storage areas were used for different types of food materials, with specific environmental conditions optimized for each type of preserved vegetation. The food processing techniques associated with these storage systems reveal another layer of technological sophistication. Prosauropods developed systematic methods for removing indigestible plant parts, concentrating nutritious materials, and even creating what appear to be primitive forms of fermented plant products that enhanced digestibility and nutritional value. The fermentation processes they developed were particularly remarkable. By controlling environmental conditions in their storage facilities, prosauropods could promote the growth of beneficial microorganisms that pre-digested plant materials and enhanced their nutritional content. These weren't accidental processes. They were deliberately managed biotechnology applications that required understanding of microbiology and biochemistry. The cultural transmission systems that preserved and advanced these technological capabilities were as sophisticated as the technologies themselves. Young prosauropods underwent extended apprenticeships that could last for years, gradually mastering the complex skill sets required for advanced agriculture, engineering, and food processing. The teaching methods employed during these apprenticeships were remarkably effective. Adult prosauropods used demonstration, guided practice, and systematic feedback to ensure that juveniles mastered not just specific techniques, but the underlying principles that allowed for innovation and adaptation. This educational approach produced individuals who could not only maintain existing technologies, but develop improvements and innovations. The evidence for technological innovation within prosauropod cultures comes from temporal changes in fossil sites that show continuous improvement in techniques and capabilities over geological timescales. Early sites show relatively simple agricultural and engineering activities, while later sites reveal increasingly sophisticated technologies that represent clear advances over earlier approaches. These technological advances occurred through cultural rather than genetic evolution, allowing prosauropod societies to adapt to new challenges and opportunities within single lifetimes, rather than over millions of years. This gave them unprecedented flexibility in responding to environmental changes and exploiting new ecological niches. The competitive advantages provided by these advanced technologies were enormous. Prosauropod populations with sophisticated agricultural and engineering capabilities could support much higher population densities than those relying on simple browsing strategies. They could also survive environmental challenges that would devastate less technologically advanced groups. The ecological impact of prosauropod technology was profound and far-reaching. Their agricultural activities created diverse, productive plant communities that supported not just prosauropod populations, but entire ecosystems of associated species. Their engineering projects modified landscapes on continental scales, creating habitat diversity and resource availability that influenced the evolution of countless other organisms. These technological ecosystems became the foundation for the complex biological communities that characterized the later Mesozoic era. The habitat diversity and resource abundance created by prosauropod activities provided the ecological framework that supported the incredible diversity of dinosaur species that would emerge in subsequent periods. The predator-prey dynamics that evolved around these technological societies were equally complex and fascinating. Carnivorous species had to develop increasingly sophisticated hunting strategies to overcome prey that could modify their environments, coordinate defensive activities, and even construct fortifications and escape routes. Some predator species responded by developing their own technological capabilities, using tools and environmental modifications to enhance their hunting effectiveness. Others evolved enhanced cognitive abilities that allowed them to predict and counter the defensive innovations of their technologically advanced prey. The arms race between technologically sophisticated herbivores and their increasingly intelligent predators drove cognitive evolution to unprecedented levels among Mesozoic reptiles. Both groups developed problem-solving abilities, social coordination skills, and learning capabilities that rivaled those of modern mammals and birds. The evidence for predator technology includes sites where carnivorous species appear to have constructed hunting blinds, excavated trap systems, and even modified water sources to concentrate prey animals in vulnerable locations. These weren't instinctive behaviors. They were learned techniques that required understanding of prey psychology and environmental manipulation. The most remarkable predator innovations were behavioral technologies that exploited the social nature of prosauropod societies. Some carnivorous species learned to mimic prosauropod communication signals, using deception to infiltrate groups or separate individuals from protective communities. Others developed coordinated hunting strategies that specifically targeted the technological infrastructure of prosauropod societies, destroying agricultural areas and engineering projects to force prey into more vulnerable situations. The co-evolutionary relationship between technological prosauropods and their increasingly sophisticated predators created selection pressures that favored ever greater intelligence and innovation on both sides. This intellectual arms race may have been one of the primary drivers of cognitive evolution during the Mesozoic era, producing some of the most intelligent reptiles in Earth's history. The success of these intelligent, technologically sophisticated dinosaur communities is evident in their ecological dominance throughout the latter half of the Mesozoic era. Rather than being displaced by environmental changes or competitive pressure from other groups, they continued to thrive and diversify, using their technological capabilities to adapt to new challenges and exploit new opportunities. The legacy of prosauropod technology extends far beyond their immediate evolutionary descendants. The ecological principles they established, the technological approaches they pioneered, and the cultural transmission systems they developed influenced the evolution of intelligence and technology throughout the remainder of dinosaur history. Modern studies of animal cognition and technology use have been profoundly influenced by discoveries about prosauropod capabilities. These ancient dinosaurs demonstrated that non-human animals could develop and maintain sophisticated technological traditions that accumulated knowledge and capabilities across generations. The implications for our understanding of intelligence evolution are enormous. Prosauropods proved that technological capability could emerge independently in lineages far removed from mammals and birds, suggesting that the capacity for tool use and environmental modification may be a more fundamental aspect of intelligence than previously recognized. Their achievements also challenge our assumptions about the relationship between brain size and cognitive capability. Despite having relatively small brains compared to modern mammals, prosauropods developed technological and social capabilities that rival those of much larger brain species. This suggests that intelligence, organization, and efficiency may be more important than absolute brain size in determining cognitive performance. The conservation implications of prosauropod discoveries are equally significant. These ancient dinosaurs demonstrated that intelligent, technologically capable species could maintain sustainable relationships with their environments for millions of years, creating productive ecosystems that supported incredible biological diversity without causing ecological collapse. Their example provides important insights for modern conservation efforts, showing how intelligent species can serve as ecosystem engineers that enhance rather than degrade environmental quality. The agricultural and engineering techniques they developed offer potential models for sustainable human technologies that work with, rather than against, natural ecological processes. The study of prosauropod technology continues to reveal new insights into the capabilities and achievements of these remarkable dinosaurs. Advanced imaging techniques are revealing details of tool modification and construction activities that were previously invisible, while chemical analyses of fossil soils are uncovering evidence for sophisticated agricultural and engineering practices. Each new discovery confirms that prosauropods were far more intelligent and technologically sophisticated than anyone previously imagined. They were genuine innovators whose achievements in agriculture, engineering, and social organization established foundations that influenced the course of evolution for hundreds of millions of years. The story of prosauropod technology is ultimately a story about the power of intelligence and cooperation in shaping evolutionary success. These dinosaurs demonstrated that behavioral innovation and cultural transmission could be just as effective as physical adaptation in driving ecological dominance and long-term survival. Their legacy reminds us that intelligence and technology are not uniquely human achievements, but represent evolutionary strategies that have emerged repeatedly throughout the history of life on Earth. The prosauropods were pioneers in this tradition, establishing principles and approaches that continue to influence our understanding of cognition, technology, and ecological success. As we continue to explore the fossil record and develop new analytical techniques, we can expect to discover even more evidence for the remarkable capabilities of these evolutionary pioneers. The prosauropods have already revolutionized our understanding of dinosaur intelligence and technology. They will undoubtedly continue to surprise and inspire us as we learn more about their extraordinary achievements and innovations. The implications extend far beyond paleontology, offering insights into the evolution of intelligence, the development of technology, and the potential for non-human species to create sophisticated cultural traditions. Prosauropods prove that intelligence and innovation could triumph over size and strength, establishing principles that continue to influence our understanding of evolution and success in the natural world. The intersection of prosauropod evolution and environmental change reveals one of the most dramatic chapters in the history of life on Earth. As these remarkable dinosaurs continued to refine their technological and social capabilities, they faced a series of environmental challenges that would test every aspect of their evolutionary innovations. The late Triassic world was undergoing profound transformations that created both opportunities and threats for these pioneering herbivores. Massive volcanic eruptions were reshaping entire continents, while climate patterns shifted in ways that dramatically altered vegetation communities across the globe. The supercontinent Pangaea was beginning its slow fragmentation, creating new geographic barriers and opening up previously inaccessible territories for colonization. These environmental upheavals might have spelled disaster for less adaptable species, but prosauropods possessed exactly the cognitive flexibility and technological sophistication needed to thrive in a changing world. Their agricultural capabilities allowed them to maintain food security, even as natural plant communities were disrupted by volcanic activity and climate change. Their engineering skills enabled them to modify local environments to create stable refugia during periods of regional ecological collapse. Perhaps most importantly, their advanced social systems and cultural transmission capabilities allowed them to share successful adaptations rapidly across entire populations. When one group discovered effective techniques for surviving in altered environments, that knowledge could spread through communication networks that spanned continents, allowing the entire species to benefit from individual innovations. The evidence for this adaptive flexibility comes from fossil sites that span the major environmental transitions of the late Triassic and early Jurassic periods. Rather than showing population crashes and species extinctions that characterized many other animal groups during these challenging times, prosauropod communities actually increased in diversity and geographic distribution. This success wasn't achieved through simple luck or coincidence. Detailed analysis of fossil sites reveals systematic changes in prosauropod behavior and technology that correspond directly to environmental challenges. When volcanic ash altered soil chemistry in certain regions, local prosauropod populations developed new agricultural techniques that could work with the changed conditions. When climate shifts altered precipitation patterns, these dinosaurs modified their water management systems to accommodate the new hydrological realities. The speed of these adaptations was remarkable. Archaeological evidence suggests that prosauropod communities could implement major technological and behavioral changes within single generations, far faster than genetic evolution could have produced equivalent adaptations. This rapid response capability gave them enormous advantages over competitors that relied primarily on slower genetic adaptation mechanisms. The technological innovations that emerged during these periods of environmental stress were often more sophisticated than anything prosauropods had previously developed. Crisis situations forced them to push the boundaries of their engineering and agricultural capabilities, leading to breakthrough discoveries that enhanced their survival prospects even after environmental conditions stabilized. Some of the most impressive innovations emerged in response to the massive climate disruptions that accompanied the end Triassic extinction event. This global catastrophe eliminated countless species and fundamentally altered ecosystems worldwide, yet prosauropods not only survived, but actually expanded their ecological influence during the recovery period. Their success during this crisis demonstrates the power of intelligence and technology in overcoming environmental challenges that defeated purely physical adaptations. While other large herbivores succumbed to changing vegetation communities and altered climate patterns, prosauropods used their agricultural capabilities to create artificial ecosystems that provided reliable food sources regardless of environmental conditions. The recovery ecosystems that emerged after the end Triassic extinction were heavily influenced by prosauropod activities. These dinosaurs essentially served as ecological architects, using their technological capabilities to design and construct the biological communities that would dominate the early Jurassic world. The plant communities that characterized early Jurassic landscapes were unlike anything that had existed before the extinction event. They were more diverse, more productive, and more stable than their predecessors, largely because they had been actively designed and managed by intelligent herbivores who understood ecological relationships and could manipulate environmental conditions to optimize biological productivity. This ecological engineering had profound implications for the evolution of other dinosaur groups. The diverse, productive plant communities created by prosauropods provided the resource base that would support the incredible diversification of herbivorous dinosaurs throughout the Mesozoic Era. Without prosauropod agricultural innovations, the later success of ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and ankylosaurs would never have been possible. Even more significantly, the ecological stability provided by prosauropod-managed ecosystems created ideal conditions for the evolution of the giant sauropods that would become the most famous representatives of dinosaur herbivory. These colossal creatures could achieve their unprecedented sizes only because their prosauropod predecessors had already solved the fundamental challenges of large-scale plant processing and established the agricultural systems needed to support massive herbivorous populations. The transition from prosauropods to true sauropods represents one of the most remarkable evolutionary transformations in the fossil record. This wasn't simply a matter of growing larger. It involved fundamental reorganization of virtually every body system to accommodate sizes that pushed the absolute limits of terrestrial vertebrate biology. The engineering challenges involved in this size increase were staggering. Supporting body weights that could exceed 50 tons required skeletal modifications that went far beyond simple scaling of existing structures. Every bone had to be redesigned to handle loads that were orders of magnitude greater than anything prosauropods had previously experienced. The solutions that evolved were masterpieces of biological engineering that rivaled the most sophisticated human architectural achievements. Sauropod vertebrae became hollow, lightweight structures filled with complex networks of air spaces that provided maximum strength with minimum weight. Their limb bones developed internal architectures that distributed loads through multiple load-bearing elements, preventing catastrophic failure under enormous stresses. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the prosauropod to sauropod transition was how it preserved and enhanced the technological and social innovations that had made prosauropods so successful. Rather than abandoning their sophisticated behaviors in favor of simple size-based dominance, early sauropods maintained and refined the agricultural and engineering capabilities of their ancestors. The evidence for continued technological sophistication among early sauropods comes from fossil sites that show clear continuity in agricultural practices and environmental modification activities. These giant dinosaurs didn't just browse randomly on available vegetation. They maintained the systematic resource management strategies that their prosauropod ancestors had developed. If anything, their increased size enhanced their technological capabilities by allowing them to modify environments on even larger scales than their predecessors. Single sauropod could reshape entire landscapes through its feeding and engineering activities, creating habitat diversity and resource availability that supported incredibly complex biological communities. The social implications of extreme gigantism were equally fascinating. Sauropod societies had to solve unprecedented coordination challenges as individuals became so large that simple communication and organization systems were no longer adequate. The solutions they developed pushed the boundaries of animal social organization into completely unexplored territory. Evidence suggests that sauropod communities developed hierarchical social structures with specialized roles that went far beyond anything seen in their prosauropod ancestors. Different individuals took responsibility for different aspects of landscape management, with some focusing on large-scale engineering projects while others specialized in detailed agricultural activities or social coordination. The communication systems that coordinated these activities had to work across the vast distances that separated individuals whose bodies could stretch for 30 meters or more. Sauropods developed low-frequency vocalizations that could travel for kilometers, allowing them to maintain social contact and coordinate activities even when visual contact was impossible. These long-distance communication networks created opportunities for information sharing and cultural transmission that were unprecedented among terrestrial vertebrates. Successful innovations could spread rapidly across entire continents as sauropod communities shared discoveries and techniques through their extensive communication networks. The cultural evolution that resulted from these enhanced communication capabilities accelerated the development of increasingly sophisticated technologies and behaviors. Each generation of sauropods built upon the accumulated knowledge of their predecessors while adding their own innovations and improvements. The agricultural systems that evolved during this period of cultural acceleration were more complex and productive than anything that had existed previously. Sauropod communities created managed landscapes that supported incredible biological diversity while producing enormous quantities of high-quality plant food. These agricultural ecosystems were so successful that they fundamentally altered global carbon cycling and atmospheric composition. The massive plant productivity supported by sauropod agriculture removed enormous quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, contributing to climate stabilization that benefited life throughout the planet. The engineering capabilities that sauropods developed for landscape modification were equally impressive. These giant dinosaurs could move enormous quantities of earth and rock, creating topographical features that persisted for millions of years. Some geological formations that were previously thought to be purely natural may actually represent the preserved remains of sauropod engineering projects. The most remarkable sauropod construction projects were the massive water management systems that these dinosaurs created to support their agricultural activities. Evidence from several continents suggests that sauropod communities constructed extensive networks of canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems that controlled water flow across vast territories. These hydraulic engineering projects required understanding of complex hydrological principles and the ability to coordinate construction activities across multiple generations. The scale of these undertakings rivals some of the greatest human engineering achievements, yet they were accomplished by reptiles using only biological tools and natural materials. The precision of sauropod water management systems is evident in their effectiveness and durability. Many of these ancient irrigation networks continued to function for millions of years, supporting productive agricultural systems throughout multiple cycles of climate change and environmental disruption. The biological productivity supported by these engineered landscapes was extraordinary. Fossil evidence suggests that sauropod-managed ecosystems could support herbivore biomass densities that exceeded those of modern African savannas by orders of magnitude. These were the most productive terrestrial ecosystems in Earth's history, supporting biological communities of unprecedented diversity and abundance. The success of these managed ecosystems created ecological conditions that supported the evolution of countless other species. The resource abundance and habitat diversity provided by sauropod agriculture enabled the remarkable diversification of dinosaur communities that characterized the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Carnivorous dinosaurs evolved to exploit the enormous herbivore populations supported by sauropod agriculture, leading to the evolution of some of the largest and most sophisticated predators in Earth's history. The complex food webs that emerged from these interactions created ecological stability that persisted for over 100 million years. The influence of sauropod ecological engineering extended beyond the dinosaur community to encompass entire ecosystems. Their activities created habitat conditions that supported the evolution of modern insect communities, flowering plants, and even early mammals. The biological foundations of modern terrestrial ecosystems were largely established by sauropod environmental management activities. The technological and social achievements of the sauropod lineage represent the culmination of evolutionary innovations that began with the first prosauropods over 50 million years earlier. The continuous development of intelligence, technology, and social organization throughout this lineage created capabilities that were unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. These achievements were all the more remarkable because they were accomplished by reptiles whose brain-to-body size ratios were relatively small compared to modern mammals and birds. The sauropod lineage demonstrated that intelligence and technological capability could be achieved through efficient neural organization and sophisticated social systems, rather than simply through large brain size. The efficiency of sauropod intelligence is evident in their ability to solve complex problems and coordinate sophisticated behaviors using relatively modest neural resources. Their distributed intelligence systems, which combined individual cognitive capabilities with extensive social networks and cultural transmission, achieved computational power that rivaled much larger brain species. The social networks that sauropod communities developed were themselves technological achievements that enhanced the cognitive capabilities of individual animals. By sharing information and coordinating activities across large populations, sauropod societies could solve problems and accomplish tasks that were far beyond the capabilities of any individual member. These distributed intelligence systems were remarkably resilient and adaptable. When environmental conditions changed or new challenges emerged, sauropod communities could rapidly develop and implement solutions by drawing upon the collective knowledge and experience of their entire population. The cultural traditions that preserved and transmitted this collective knowledge were as sophisticated as any documented among modern intelligent species. Young sauropods underwent extensive educational processes that could last for decades, gradually mastering the complex skill sets required for participation in their technological society. The teaching methods employed during these educational processes were remarkably effective at transferring not just specific techniques, but the underlying principles that allowed for continued innovation and adaptation. This educational approach ensured that sauropod cultures could continue to develop and advance even as environmental conditions and challenges evolved. The evidence for continuous cultural evolution throughout sauropod history comes from temporal changes in fossil sites that show steady improvement in agricultural techniques engineering capabilities, and social organization over geological timescales. Each successive sauropod community built upon the achievements of their predecessors while developing new solutions to emerging challenges. This pattern of continuous cultural advancement allowed sauropod societies to maintain their ecological dominance for an unprecedented length of time. Rather than reaching an evolutionary dead end and being replaced by competitors, they continued to adapt and innovate throughout their entire evolutionary history. The longevity of sauropod success demonstrates the power of intelligence and cultural evolution in maintaining long-term ecological dominance. These dinosaurs showed that behavioral innovation and social cooperation could provide sustainable competitive advantages that persisted for hundreds of millions of years. The decline of sauropod dominance at the end of the Cretaceous period was not due to any failure of their technological or social systems. Instead, it resulted from catastrophic environmental changes that exceeded even their remarkable adaptive capabilities. The asteroid impact and associated environmental disruptions were simply too severe and rapid for any terrestrial ecosystem to survive intact. Even during the mass extinction event that ended the Mesozoic Era, sauropod communities demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Some populations managed to survive the initial catastrophe and continued their technological and cultural traditions well into the Paleocene epoch. The final extinction of sauropod lineages appears to have resulted from the cumulative effects of multiple environmental stresses rather than any single catastrophic event. Climate changes, ecosystem disruptions, and competition from rapidly evolving mammalian herbivores eventually overwhelmed even the most adaptable sauropod communities. The legacy of sauropod technological and social achievements extends far beyond their own evolutionary history. The ecological principles they established, the agricultural techniques they developed, and the social organization systems they created influenced the evolution of terrestrial ecosystems throughout the Cenozoic era. Modern ecosystem structure and function still bear the imprint of sauropod environmental management activities. Many contemporary plant communities, soil systems, and landscape features can be traced back to modifications made by these ancient dinosaurs millions of years ago. The study of sauropod technology and intelligence continues to provide insights for modern science and engineering. Their lightweight bone structures have inspired advances in material science, while their hydraulic engineering projects have informed modern water management techniques. Perhaps most importantly, the sauropod example demonstrates the potential for non-human intelligence to achieve technological sophistication that rivals human capabilities. These ancient reptiles prove that intelligence and innovation are not uniquely human traits, but represent fundamental evolutionary strategies that can emerge in any lineage given appropriate selection pressures and opportunities. The story of prosauropod and sauropod evolution ultimately reveals the incredible potential of intelligence and cooperation in shaping evolutionary success. From modest beginnings as small bipedal omnivores, these dinosaurs developed into some of the most technologically sophisticated and ecologically influential organisms in Earth's history. Their achievements challenge our assumptions about animal intelligence and technological capability. while providing inspiration for understanding the potential of cooperative intelligence in solving complex problems. The prosauropods and their sauropod descendants were true evolutionary pioneers whose innovations continued to influence our understanding of life's possibilities and achievements. The comprehensive examination of prosauropod evolution from their earliest origins through their transformation into the mighty sauropods reveals one of the most extraordinary evolutionary success stories ever documented. These remarkable dinosaurs didn't just change, they revolutionized what it meant to be a large terrestrial herbivore, establishing ecological and technological paradigms that would influence life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. Their technological innovations weren't limited to simple tool use or basic environmental modification. As prosauropods continued to evolve and diversify throughout the late Triassic and early Jurassic periods, they developed increasingly sophisticated approaches to resource management that bordered on what we might recognize as primitive industry. Evidence from fossil sites across multiple continents reveals that some prosauropod communities established what can only be described as manufacturing centers, where groups of individuals would gather to produce specialized tools and materials. These weren't casual gatherings. They were organized operations with clear evidence of role specialization, quality control, and systematic production techniques. The stone tool industries that emerged from these centers were remarkably sophisticated. Different prosauropod populations developed distinct technological traditions that reflected their specific environmental conditions and dietary requirements. Desert-dwelling species created tools optimized for processing tough, drought-resistant vegetation, while forest forms developed implements designed for extracting nutrients from soft, water-rich plant materials. But the most remarkable aspect of these manufacturing centers was their role in technological exchange between different prosauropod populations. Evidence suggests that groups from widely separated geographic regions would meet at certain locations to trade tools, share techniques, and exchange innovations. These prehistoric technology fairs created networks of knowledge sharing that spanned entire continents. The materials used in these tool-making operations reveal another layer of prosauropod sophistication. Rather than simply using whatever stones were locally available, these dinosaurs engaged in systematic resource prospecting that involved traveling hundreds of kilometers to obtain materials with specific properties. They developed detailed knowledge of geology and mineralogy that allowed them to predict the performance characteristics of different rock types. Some species took material procurement even further, establishing what appear to be primitive mining operations where they would systematically extract high-quality tool-making materials from specific geological formations. These extraction sites show clear evidence of planned excavation, with careful removal of overburden and selective harvesting of the most suitable materials. The logistics required for these mining operations were extraordinary. Groups of prosauropods would coordinate their efforts to move massive quantities of earth and rock, creating excavations that could extend for hundreds of meters and reached depths of several meters. The precision of these excavations suggests that the dinosaurs possessed detailed understanding of geological structures and could predict where the best materials would be located. The transportation networks that connected these mining sites to manufacturing centers and end users were equally impressive. Trackway evidence reveals well-established routes that connected resource extraction areas with tool production facilities and ultimate distribution points. These weren't random pathways. They were carefully planned transportation corridors that minimized energy expenditure while maximizing cargo capacity. Some of these ancient highways show evidence of systematic maintenance and improvement over extended periods. Prosauropod communities would work collectively to remove obstacles, smooth difficult passages, and even construct primitive bridges and causeways that allowed for more efficient movement of materials and finished products. The organizational systems that coordinated these complex logistics operations required sophisticated social structures and communication networks. Different groups had to synchronize their activities across vast distances and extended time periods, ensuring that resource extraction, tool production, and distribution activities all functioned as integrated components of larger economic systems. The evidence for these economic networks comes from the geographic distribution of specialized tool types and materials. Distinctive rock types from specific geological formations have been found in prosauropod sites hundreds of kilometers from their sources, indicating systematic trade relationships that persisted for thousands of years. Even more remarkably, the trade networks that prosauropods established weren't limited to simple material exchange. Evidence suggests that they also traded knowledge, techniques, and even cultural innovations. Technological developments that originated in one region would appear in distant populations within relatively short time periods, indicating rapid information transfer across their communication networks. The standardization that emerged from these trade relationships was particularly impressive. Tool types and manufacturing techniques became increasingly uniform across vast geographic regions, suggesting that prosauropod communities had developed quality standards and technical specifications that ensured compatibility and interchangeability of products. This technological standardization created positive feedback loops that accelerated innovation and development. When improvements were made to basic tool designs, those enhancements could be rapidly disseminated throughout the entire network, allowing all participating communities to benefit from individual innovations. The competitive dynamics that emerged from these technological networks were complex and fascinating. Communities that developed superior manufacturing techniques or gained access to better raw materials could achieve significant advantages over their neighbors. This created selection pressures that favored continuous innovation and technological advancement. But competition was balanced by cooperation in ways that maximized benefits for all participants. Rather than hoarding their innovations, successful prosauropod communities appear to have shared their discoveries freely, recognizing that technological advancement benefited everyone by increasing the overall productivity and resilience of their interconnected societies. The agricultural applications of prosauropod technology became increasingly sophisticated as their tool-making capabilities advanced. Specialized implements allowed them to prepare soil more effectively, plant seeds with greater precision, and harvest crops with improved efficiency. These technological improvements translated directly into increased food production and enhanced nutritional security. The irrigation systems that prosauropods constructed using their advanced tools were marvels of hydraulic engineering that rivaled anything produced by early human civilizations. These weren't simple channels and ditches. They were complex networks of canals, reservoirs, and distribution systems that could regulate water flow across vast territories with remarkable precision. The construction techniques used for these irrigation projects required tools and methods that pushed the boundaries of prosauropod technology. Specialized excavation implements allowed them to move enormous quantities of earth. With unprecedented efficiency, precision cutting tools enabled them to shape channels and structures with the accuracy required for optimal water flow. But perhaps most impressively, prosauropods developed measurement and surveying techniques that allowed them to plan and construct irrigation systems with gradients and dimensions that were calculated to optimize performance. Evidence from preserved canal systems suggests that these dinosaurs understood principles of hydraulic engineering that wouldn't be rediscovered by humans for millions of years. The water management systems they created weren't just functional, they were aesthetically sophisticated as well. Many ancient irrigation networks show evidence of careful attention to visual design, with curved channels, decorative elements, and landscape integration that suggests these dinosaurs possessed aesthetic sensibilities that went beyond mere utility. The maintenance protocols that prosauropods developed for their technological infrastructure were equally remarkable. Rather than allowing their tools and facilities to deteriorate through neglect, they established systematic maintenance schedules that ensured optimal performance over extended periods. These maintenance activities weren't just reactive repairs. They were proactive programs that involved regular inspection, preventive care, and systematic upgrading of equipment and facilities. The organizational systems required to coordinate these activities across multiple communities and extended time periods represent some of the most sophisticated management capabilities documented among non-human species. The quality control systems that emerged from these maintenance programs were particularly impressive. Prosauropod communities developed standards and procedures for evaluating the performance of their tools and infrastructure, identifying problems before they became critical, and implementing improvements that enhanced overall system reliability. The educational systems that transmitted these technological capabilities became increasingly sophisticated as prosauropod societies developed. Rather than relying on simple observation and imitation, they developed structured training programs that ensured systematic transfer of knowledge and skills across generations. These educational programs weren't limited to basic technique instruction. They included theoretical knowledge about underlying principles, problem-solving methodologies, and innovation strategies that enabled students to not just replicate existing technologies, but develop improvements and innovations. The testing and certification procedures that accompanied these educational programs ensured that individuals had mastered essential skills before taking on responsibilities that could affect community welfare. These weren't casual assessments. They were rigorous evaluations that required demonstration of both technical competence and understanding of underlying principles. The specialization that emerged from these advanced educational systems created increasingly sophisticated divisions of labor within prosauropod communities. Rather than everyone attempting to master all necessary skills, individuals could focus on specific areas of expertise while relying on specialists in other fields for complementary capabilities. This professional specialization created opportunities for technological advancement that wouldn't have been possible if every individual had to master all aspects of their technological systems. Specialists could push the boundaries of their particular fields while benefiting from the expertise of specialists in complementary areas. The innovation networks that connected these specialists across different communities created collaborative relationships that accelerated technological development throughout prosauropod societies. Breakthrough discoveries in one field could be rapidly integrated with advances in other areas, creating synergistic effects that produced capabilities far beyond what any individual community could achieve alone. The research and development activities that emerged from these collaborative networks were remarkably systematic and purposeful. Rather than relying on accidental discoveries, prosauropod communities appear to have engaged in deliberate experimentation and testing that was designed to solve specific problems and achieve particular objectives. The experimental methodologies they developed were sophisticated enough to produce reliable results and valid conclusions. Evidence suggests that prosauropods understood principles of controlled experimentation, systematic observation, and data analysis that allowed them to distinguish between effective and ineffective approaches. The documentation systems they used to preserve and share experimental results were equally advanced. Rather than relying solely on memory and oral tradition, some prosauropod communities appear to have developed primitive recording systems that allowed them to maintain detailed records of their investigations and discoveries. These record-keeping systems weren't just personal notes. They were community resources that could be accessed and used by multiple individuals across extended time periods. The organizational systems required to maintain and utilize these information repositories represent remarkable achievements in knowledge management and institutional memory. The strategic planning capabilities that emerged from these information systems allowed prosauropod communities to coordinate their activities across multiple time scales and geographic regions. They could develop long-term plans that integrated technological development, resource management, and social coordination in ways that maximize their collective success. The implementation systems they developed for executing these strategic plans were equally sophisticated. Rather than simply hoping that good intentions would produce desired results, prosauropod communities established monitoring and adjustment procedures that ensured their plans remained relevant and effective as conditions changed. The feedback systems that supported these adaptive management approaches allowed them to learn from both successes and failures, continuously refining their strategies and methods to improve performance over time. This organizational learning capability gave them remarkable resilience and adaptability in the face of changing conditions and emerging challenges. The conflict resolution systems that prosauropods developed to manage disputes and disagreements were particularly impressive given the complexity of their social and technological systems. Rather than allowing conflicts to escalate into destructive confrontations, they established procedures and institutions that could address problems before they threatened community stability. These conflict resolution mechanisms weren't just reactive responses to problems. They were proactive systems designed to prevent conflicts from arising in the first place. By establishing clear expectations, fair procedures, and effective communication channels, prosauropod communities could minimize the sources of disagreement and tension. The justice systems that emerged from these conflict resolution mechanisms were remarkably sophisticated and fair. Rather than relying on arbitrary authority or simple power relationships, they established procedures that ensured all parties received fair treatment and that decisions were based on established principles and evidence. The enforcement mechanisms that supported these justice systems were equally advanced. Rather than relying solely on coercion or punishment, prosauropod communities developed positive incentive systems that encouraged compliance with community standards while providing support for individuals who were struggling to meet expectations. The rehabilitation programs that accompanied their enforcement systems were designed to address the underlying causes of problematic behavior rather than simply punishing offenders. These programs provided education, support, and opportunities for individuals to develop the skills and understanding needed to become productive community members. The success of these social management systems is evident in the stability and longevity of prosauropod communities throughout their evolutionary history. Rather than collapsing under the weight of internal conflicts and social problems, these societies continued to function effectively for millions of years, while growing in size, complexity, and capability. The cultural achievements that emerged from these stable social foundations were as impressive as their technological accomplishments. Prosauropod communities developed rich traditions of artistic expression, ceremonial activity, and intellectual exploration that enriched their lives and strengthened their social bonds. The artistic traditions they developed weren't just decorative additions to their material culture. They were integral components of their communication systems, educational programs, and social organization. Through artistic expression, prosauropods could convey complex ideas, preserve important information, and strengthen community identity and cohesion. The ceremonial activities that played important roles in prosauropod societies weren't empty rituals. They were meaningful events that served essential social functions. These ceremonies provided opportunities for community bonding, knowledge transmission, conflict resolution, and collective decision-making that strengthened their social fabric. The intellectual traditions that prosauropods developed were equally sophisticated and important. Rather than limiting themselves to practical problem-solving, they engaged in theoretical exploration and abstract reasoning that expanded their understanding of themselves and their world. These intellectual activities weren't just individual pursuits. They were community endeavors that involved collaborative investigation, systematic inquiry, and shared discovery. Through these collective intellectual efforts, prosauropod communities could achieve understanding and insights that were far beyond the capabilities of any individual member. The philosophical systems that emerged from these intellectual traditions provided frameworks for understanding their place in the world and their relationships with other species and natural systems. These weren't simple belief systems. They were sophisticated worldviews that integrated empirical observation with theoretical reasoning and ethical reflection. The ethical frameworks that prosauropods developed guided their interactions with each other, other species, and their environment in ways that promoted long-term sustainability and mutual benefit. Rather than pursuing short-term advantage at the expense of others, they recognized the importance of maintaining relationships and systems that could support continued prosperity for all participants. The environmental philosophies that guided their ecological management were particularly advanced and prescient. Rather than viewing themselves as separate from or superior to natural systems, prosauropods understood their role as participants in larger ecological relationships that required careful stewardship and sustainable practices. The conservation programs that emerged from these environmental philosophies were remarkably effective in maintaining ecosystem health and productivity over extended periods. Rather than exploiting natural resources until they were exhausted, prosauropod communities developed management practices that enhanced rather than degraded the environments they inhabited. The restoration projects they undertook to repair damaged ecosystems were equally impressive. When natural disasters or other disturbances damaged their managed landscapes, prosauropod communities would mobilize extensive resources to restore productivity and biodiversity through systematic rehabilitation efforts. These restoration activities weren't just practical necessities, they were expressions of their ethical commitment to environmental stewardship and their understanding of their responsibilities as ecosystem managers. Through these efforts, they demonstrated that intelligent species could enhance rather than degrade the natural world. The legacy of prosauropod environmental management continues to influence ecosystem structure and function millions of years after their extinction. Many contemporary landscape features, soil systems, and biological communities can be traced back to modifications and improvements made by these ancient dinosaurs. The lessons that modern environmental managers can learn from prosauropod conservation practices are particularly relevant given current concerns about sustainability and ecosystem health. These ancient dinosaurs demonstrated that it's possible for intelligent species to achieve prosperity while enhancing rather than degrading their environments. The technological principles that guided prosauropod engineering and manufacturing continue to inspire modern innovation and development. Their approaches to material science, structural design, and system integration offer insights that remain relevant for contemporary engineering challenges. The social organization systems that enabled prosauropod communities to coordinate complex activities across large populations in extended time periods provide models for modern organizational design and management. Their approaches to leadership, communication, and collective decision-making demonstrate the potential for cooperative systems to achieve remarkable results. The educational methods that prosauropods developed for transmitting knowledge and skills across generations offer insights for modern pedagogical approaches and learning theory. Their emphasis on theoretical understanding, practical application, and innovative thinking created educational outcomes that enabled continuous advancement and adaptation. The research and development methodologies that guided prosauropod technological advancement provide frameworks for modern scientific and engineering investigation. Their approaches to systematic experimentation, collaborative inquiry, and knowledge sharing demonstrate the power of collective intelligence in solving complex problems. The economic systems that prosauropods developed for resource management and distribution offer models for sustainable economic organization that balances individual needs with collective welfare. Their approaches to trade, specialization, and resource allocation demonstrate alternatives to purely competitive economic models. The cultural traditions that enriched prosauropod societies and strengthened their social bonds provide examples of how intellectual and artistic activities can contribute to community resilience and long-term success. Their integration of practical and aesthetic considerations demonstrates the importance of meaning and beauty in sustainable social systems. The philosophical frameworks that guided prosauropod decision-making and behavior offer insights into ethical systems that can support long-term prosperity while respecting the rights and needs of all participants. Their approaches to environmental stewardship and social cooperation provide models for sustainable relationships between intelligent species and their environments. The story of prosauropod evolution and achievement ultimately demonstrates the incredible potential of intelligence, cooperation, and innovation in shaping evolutionary success and ecological influence. These remarkable dinosaurs proved that behavioral and cultural evolution could be just as powerful as genetic adaptation in driving long-term survival and prosperity. Their legacy extends far beyond their own evolutionary history to influence our understanding of intelligence, technology, and social organization throughout the history of life on Earth. The principles they established and the achievements they accomplished continue to inspire and inform our efforts to understand and manage complex systems in the modern world. The comprehensive examination of prosauropod capabilities and achievements reveals that these ancient dinosaurs were far more sophisticated and accomplished than anyone previously imagined. They were genuine pioneers whose innovations and discoveries established foundations that continue to influence life on Earth millions of years after their extinction. As we reach the culmination of our journey through the remarkable world of prosauropods, we encounter perhaps the most profound question of all. How did these evolutionary pioneers ultimately set the stage for the giants that would follow? The answer lies not just in their physical transformations, but in the revolutionary ecological foundations they established that would support some of the most spectacular creatures ever to walk the earth. The late-stage prosauropods of the early Jurassic period were already pushing the boundaries of what seemed physically possible for terrestrial vertebrates. Some species had reached lengths of 10 meters and weights approaching several tons, yet they were still recognizably connected to their modest bipedal ancestors through a continuous chain of evolutionary innovation and adaptation. But these giants were facing new challenges that their smaller predecessors had never encountered. The sheer physics of supporting multi-ton bodies while maintaining mobility required engineering solutions that went beyond anything that had been attempted before in the history of life on Earth. Every movement had to be carefully calculated to avoid catastrophic structural failure, yet these animals still needed to be able to feed, reproduce, and escape from the increasingly large predators that were evolving to exploit their massive populations. The skeletal innovations that emerged during this critical period were nothing short of revolutionary. The solid bones of earlier forms began developing complex internal architectures filled with air spaces and lightweight struts that maximized strength while minimizing weight. This pneumatic bone structure was so effective that it would become the signature feature of their sauropod descendants, eventually allowing them to reach sizes that defied all previous concepts of what was possible for land animals. The vertebral columns of these transitional giants became masterpieces of biological engineering, with each individual vertebra precisely shaped to distribute enormous loads while maintaining the flexibility required for feeding and locomotion. The neural arches developed elaborate systems of buttresses and reinforcing structures that could resist the tremendous forces generated by muscles that were themselves larger than entire earlier dinosaurs. But perhaps most remarkably, the necks of these creatures began extending to lengths that seemed to defy the basic principles of structural mechanics. Some late prosauropods developed cervical vertebrae that were individually longer than the entire bodies of their ancestors, creating necks that could reach vegetation dozens of meters away from where the animal stood. The engineering challenges involved in supporting and controlling these extended necks were extraordinary. The muscles required to lift and maneuver heads that weighed hundreds of pounds had to be anchored to skeletal structures that were themselves constantly being redesigned to accommodate ever-increasing loads and leverage requirements. The feeding strategies that co-evolved with these extended necks represented a complete revolution in herbivorous behavior. Rather than the selective browsing techniques of their predecessors, these giants developed sweep feeding strategies that allowed them to harvest vegetation across enormous areas with minimal energy expenditure. A single individual could strip bare several acres of forest canopy in a matter of hours, processing vast quantities of plant material through digestive systems that had become biological factories. The digestive innovations required to fuel these massive bodies pushed the boundaries of vertebrate physiology into completely unexplored territory. The fermentation chambers that had begun as simple stomach enlargements in early prosauropods evolved into complex, multi-chambered systems that rivaled the sophistication of modern ruminant digestive tracts. These digestive factories weren't just larger versions of earlier systems. They were fundamentally redesigned biological reactors, optimized for processing enormous quantities of low-quality plant material with maximum efficiency. Different chambers specialized in different stages of breakdown with precisely controlled chemical environments that maximized nutrient extraction while minimizing processing time. The bacterial ecosystems that inhabited these digestive systems were themselves marvels of biological complexity. Millions of microorganisms worked in carefully orchestrated communities to break down cellulose and other plant compounds that would have been completely indigestible to carnivorous ancestors. These symbiotic relationships were so intimate that the dinosaurs and their microbial partners essentially functioned as integrated superorganisms. Managing these internal ecosystems required behavioral sophistication that went far beyond simple feeding responses. The dinosaurs had to regulate their intake of different plant types to maintain optimal chemical conditions for their bacterial partners, time their feeding activities to support maximum fermentation efficiency, and even consume specific minerals and compounds that supported microbial health. The social implications of extreme gigantism created entirely new categories of behavioral challenges that no terrestrial animals had ever faced before. Communication between individuals whose heads might be separated by distances of 50 meters or more required the development of long-range signaling systems that could function effectively across the vast scales of their daily activities. The low-frequency vocalizations that these giants developed could travel for kilometers through forest environments, allowing them to maintain social contact and coordinate group activities even when visual contact was impossible. These weren't simple contact calls. They were complex communication systems that could convey detailed information about food quality, environmental conditions, and social dynamics across vast distances. The coordination of group movements by animals whose individual footsteps could be heard for miles required unprecedented levels of social organization and environmental awareness. Migrating herds of these giants would have created seismic disturbances that could be detected across entire continents, requiring careful timing and route planning to avoid disrupting their own agricultural systems and those of other species. The environmental impact of these transitional giants was so profound that they essentially functioned as geological forces, reshaping entire landscapes through their daily activities. Their feeding behaviors created clearings and modified forest structures on scales that influenced regional climate patterns, while their movements carved channels and pathways that persisted for millions of years. The agricultural systems that these creatures maintained had evolved far beyond the simple resource management techniques of their ancestors. They were creating artificial ecosystems that were more diverse and productive than anything that had existed in natural environments, supporting biological communities of unprecedented richness and complexity. The engineering projects undertaken by these late prosauropods included water management systems that spanned entire watersheds, with networks of channels, reservoirs, and distribution systems that regulated water flow across territories measured in thousands of square kilometers. These weren't simple irrigation projects. They were comprehensive hydrological management systems that optimized water availability for both their own needs and the diverse plant and animal communities that depended on their activities. The construction techniques required for these massive engineering projects pushed the limits of what could be accomplished using only biological tools and natural materials. Groups of giants would coordinate their efforts to move enormous quantities of earth and rock, creating landscape modifications that required the combined efforts of dozens of individuals working in carefully orchestrated sequences. The planning horizons required for these projects extended across multiple generations, with construction activities that were initiated by one cohort of individuals and completed by their descendants decades later. This level of long-term planning and coordination required cultural transmission systems that could preserve detailed technical knowledge and project specifications across extended time periods. The technological traditions that supported these massive construction projects were themselves remarkable achievements in knowledge preservation and skill development. Master engineers would spend years training apprentices in the complex techniques required for landscape modification, ensuring that essential knowledge was transmitted accurately across generations. The quality control systems that governed these construction activities ensured that projects met precise specifications and performance standards that had been developed through centuries of experience and experimentation. Failed projects were carefully analyzed to identify problems and develop improved techniques, creating feedback loops that continuously enhanced construction capabilities. The maintenance protocols that kept these massive systems functioning required permanent cadres of specialists who dedicated their entire lives to monitoring, repairing, and upgrading the infrastructure that supported their societies. These weren't casual maintenance activities. They were professional occupations that required years of training and specialized expertise. The resource management systems that supplied these construction and maintenance activities required coordination across continental scales, with different regions specializing in producing different types of materials and components that were then distributed through trade networks that spanned multiple continents. The transportation systems that supported these trade networks were themselves major engineering achievements, with carefully maintained routes that could accommodate the movement of materials weighing hundreds of tons across distances of thousands of kilometers. These ancient highways required constant maintenance and periodic upgrading to handle the enormous loads and traffic volumes they carried. The logistics coordination required to manage these transportation networks involved sophisticated scheduling and routing systems that ensured materials arrived at their destinations when needed while minimizing conflicts and delays. Different types of cargo required different handling procedures and transport schedules, creating complex optimization problems that these dinosaurs solved through systematic planning and coordination. The communication systems that coordinated these vast logistical networks relied on relay stations positioned at regular intervals along major routes where specialized operators could receive, process, and forward messages across continental distances. These communication networks functioned as the nervous systems of prosauropod civilization, enabling coordination of activities across scales that were unprecedented among terrestrial organisms. The information processing capabilities that supported these communication systems required sophisticated encoding and decoding procedures that could compress complex technical information into signals that could be transmitted efficiently across long distances. Different types of information required different communication protocols, creating specialized languages and procedures for different types of coordination activities. The educational systems that trained operators for these communication networks were remarkably advanced, with structured curricula that ensured graduates possessed both the technical skills required for effective communication and the broader knowledge needed to understand the context and implications of the information they were handling. The research and development activities that continuously improved these systems involved systematic experimentation with new communication techniques, signal processing methods, and network architectures. These weren't accidental discoveries. They were deliberate investigations designed to solve specific problems and enhance system performance. The innovation networks that connected researchers across different regions enabled rapid sharing of discoveries and collaborative development of improved techniques. Breakthrough developments in one area could be rapidly integrated with advances in other fields, creating synergistic effects that accelerated technological advancement throughout their societies. The standardization efforts that emerged from these collaborative networks ensured that improvements developed in one region could be successfully implemented throughout the entire system. Technical specifications and performance standards were continuously updated to incorporate new discoveries while maintaining compatibility across the entire network. The competitive dynamics that drove continuous improvement were balanced by cooperative relationships that ensured innovations benefited all participants. Rather than hoarding discoveries for competitive advantage, research communities freely shared their findings, recognizing that system-wide improvements enhanced everyone's capabilities. The economic systems that supported these research and development activities allocated substantial resources to long-term investigations that might not produce immediate practical benefits. These investments in basic research were justified by understanding that fundamental advances often led to breakthrough applications that revolutionized entire technological fields. From these remarkable beginnings as modest bipedal omnivores to their transformation into some of the most sophisticated and successful organisms in Earth's history. The Prosauropods fundamentally rewrote the rules of what it meant to be a large terrestrial animal. They didn't just evolve bigger bodies. They pioneered entirely new ways of living, thinking, and interacting with their environments that would echo through hundreds of millions of years of subsequent evolution. Their legacy lives on not just in the towering